Welcome to the very first Renegade Detroit Investor Podcast. My name is Jeremy Burgess, and I'll be your host. For those of you who've never attended a Renegade Detroit Investor meeting, Renegade Detroit Investors was founded in 2008, and it's like a RIA, but it's a little different. It's no sales from the front, local experts only, and a heavy emphasis on deal flow and on deal flow and networking. I've been a professional real estate investor since 2006. I moved to Detroit with my wife in May of 2007, and my career has been a cautionary tale. But anyway, I digress. Renegade Detroit Investors, we used to have a meeting and we had a local investor expert come to the meeting, and this is the first podcast where we're actually separating the local expert from the physical meeting and put it on the interwebs, the internets, for the entire world to listen and participate. Go ahead and follow us. Go to facebook.com/Detroit Investment Club. That's where we post all of our meetings. If you want to network, if you got a deal you're trying to sell, whatever, you can post it there. You can also go to renegadedetroit.com. And for the Twitter folks, go ahead and give me a follow at Jeremy Burgess. And now, of course, the legal disclaimer. Today, these are just the opinions of myself, the host, and of the guest. They are just opinions. This is not legal advice. In no way could this be construed as legal advice. And before you do anything, we highly recommend you go and hire a legal professional of your own choosing before you do anything. The quote of the show today from Ayn Rand: most people would rather die than change. Something for you to think about as we move on with the inaugural podcast. And for the inaugural podcast, I'm happy that we have an excellent speaker and a friend, Mr. Allan Daniels, who I'm going to introduce right now without further ado. Dr. Daniels and Sons is one of the largest purchasers of land contracts in Michigan. The Daniels family has been purchasing land contracts and private seller-held notes and mortgages for 3 generations. Allan Daniels has been licensed in Michigan real estate since 1988 and specializes in buying land contracts and real estate. He also offers private money, business purpose, real estate loans. Read, you can't live there, or sign that you live there, or pretend that you live there, or anything like that.
Professional landlords and real estate investors only.
Yes. None of that 2007, 2008 crap. In Michigan, Allan served as president of the Michigan Mortgage Brokers Association, forever referred to as MMBA, in 2000. For his achievements, Allan earned the MMBA 2000 Distinguished Leadership Award and was named the MMBA Broker of the Year for 2001, 2, and 3. Allan was the first recipient of the MMBA Lifetime Achievement Award in 2004. In addition to his work within Michigan, Allan previously served in the National Association of Mortgage Brokers as a member of the Board of Directors, Delegate Council, Government Affairs, Bylaws, and Best Lending Practices Committees. Allan also served as an officer on the NAMB Executive Committee as treasurer, and also as a regional vice chair of the NAMB Legislative Committee for the Midwest region. Currently, Allan serves as chairman of State of Michigan Mortgage Industry Advisory Board that makes recommendations to the director of the Department of Insurance and Financial Services, the state agency, commies, that regulate mortgages and land contracts. Allan also serves on the Board of Governors of the Michigan Mortgage Lenders Association, the Public Policy Committee for the Michigan Realtors, and both the Conventional Financing and Public Policy Coordinating Committees of the National Association of Realtors. This is still going. This guy knows his shit, all right? Allan is an approved real estate and mortgage continuing education instructor. He has frequently testified as an industry expert before committees of the Michigan State and House of Representatives, and has been published in numerous mortgage and real estate trade journals and media outlets, including the Washington Times, Bloomberg, NPR, Michigan Radio, and the Wall Street Journal. Allan is a lifelong resident of Bloomfield Township, where he resides with his wife, Kelly, his son Michael, and daughter Leah. Leah, thank you. Allan is a graduate of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, no Spartans here. And he has come to Renegade Detroit Investors several times. He gave, and I will put the link under too, because we will get to it. I know the question will come up.
Okay.
Dodd Frank. I actually recorded that, and that will be in the show notes when we get there. And then I got literally a salad of letters behind his name: professional memberships, education. Suffice to say, he probably knows more than any human really should about real estate, lending, mortgages, private or commercial. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for coming to the first RDI podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Jeremy. Thank you. You and I first met on Facebook, I remember.
I was going to bring that up.
Okay, well, you can do it. But
Let me do it.
Okay, fair enough. But no, what I do want to do is thank you. We met on Facebook, and then Jeremy will tell the specifics of that story. But then he found out that maybe I know a little bit and asked me to come and speak. And it was the first time I'd done a presentation like that in quite some time, since before the PowerPoint days. I think we used an overhead projector way back when. And it ended up that I sort of enjoyed doing it and turned that presentation and some others into things that we presented to the state of Michigan and got approved as real estate continuing education. So while it's nothing I can retire off of, I wanted to thank you for getting me on the speaking circuit and taking away time from my livelihood. No.
I did record that, and I will put that in the show notes.
Okay, so one of us is making money.
Yes,
from it.
well,
Okay.
not money,
No,
but getting you some views. So
Okay.
we've all done this, right? You know, they say you only get one chance at a first impression. Well, the internet's not always the best place for that. He had recently stumbled upon the Renegade Detroit Investor page on Facebook, and I had posted some link or article about land contracts, seller financing, and at the time, this was 2009, early 2010, I was working with a company, and we did a fair number of homeowner land contracts, and Allan left an excellent point, saying, hey, be careful, there's some rules, something like this. He cited some rules. And what did I do? Because I was on the internet and I was annoyed that day. I left a shitty comment. I was like, well, I don't know, I might answer that question. How many land contracts have you done? Well, I still didn't catch it.
I think Kelly Brittingham.
She did, yeah. Kelly Brittingham got on there. It's like, I think he may know a thing or two about land contracts. And I was like, as soon as she said it, I was like, oh crap. So I got on the internet, I Googled it, of course, bam, website comes right up, and I see blog post after blog post. I start counting years, and all I have to say, people, is it's never too late to apologize. I immediately apologized for making such a shitty remark, and then from there, I was like, hey, you brought up some good points. You should come to the Renegade Detroit Investor meeting. So that's how we met. So I guess the point I'd like to make is it's if you're wrong too, or you make an ass out of yourself, it's never too late to correct that, because people might remember. But that's actually how we met, with a shitty internet comment. And you're very gracious to let me apologize and back my way out of that. So.
Well, it's you know, I mean, we've all done that sometime, where you say something and, you know, you're being a smart aleck or whichever, and then you realize, you know, maybe I'd like to buy that DeLorean with a flux capacitor and go back to yesterday and start over.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, of all the people I could have done that
Yeah.
with, oh man.
But you turned a lemon into lemonade.
I did, as quickly as I possibly could too, which is good, because I wouldn't have a career if I didn't, if I didn't do that with the mistakes I made. So, but anyway, I read that long list and all that, and for everybody. So, Allan buys notes. I'm sure that's not all you do, and he's also a business lender. And how many years now?
Well, I started in '88. I had graduated from U of M in '88 with a BA in communication, and I thought I was going to be an account executive with a technology company. At the time, AT&T, they split up. The government split up the Bell system, and AT&T was going to be a big computer competitor with IBM. and they flew me to Chicago and Minneapolis, where I had to go through their assessments to see whether it was suitable for me, and I passed that supposedly with flying colors. I got a call from them that they would be hiring me as an account executive, sales and marketing, as soon as their hiring freeze was over. So those of you that have been in the corporate world sort of know where this is going probably. Well, I'm 23 years old, just graduated from college, and so what do? Well, I got my real estate license, I got my insurance license because I was pretty good at taking classes and passing tests. And my dad, like a lot of doctors and dentists, had dabbled in real estate through the years, and his father before him, who was an engineer, moonlighted in a real estate office, and because he was good with figures, did amortizations before computers existed. So they knew about
That's
buying.
old school right there.
They knew about buying contracts and buying notes, and so what I did to sort of pass the time and pay for groceries while I was waiting for AT&T to call back is I would go to the county, research people that had sold property on land contract, and there were a lot of them coming out of the 70s and 80s. And then with the white pages, which wasn't an app, it was a book, call them up. There was no do not call list to worry about as far as compliance. And I was able to put a couple of deals together that summer. And so that's sort of how I got started myself in buying paper. And I forgot what your original question was now.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
I like this. So how many years have you been doing this?
Well, so that was 1988, and
Wow.
So then I came on full-time with my dad in January of '89, and I think I got a raise in 1990, and that was the year we applied to the state to get our mortgage license, which we got in '90. And so unlike a lot of father-son businesses that don't last the first week, my dad and I have been working together for, 27 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna come back to that, but so
Okay.
this is a worldwide internet's podcast. So land contracts, not everybody knows what that is. It's certainly a Midwest thing. Can you tell the audience what is, because they could be listening all over the world, Europe, Australia, China, even the West Coast, they have no idea what a land contract is. Can you explain what a land contract is?
Well, the easiest way to explain it is as a contract for deed. In a more conventional situation, a buyer would pay a seller for a property they're buying with a bag of money. Now, whether that's from their savings account, they give that bag of money to the seller, get the deed, they're done, the seller's out of it, or they start a new relationship with the lender that gave them that bag of money, and then they start paying the lender back to fill up the lender's bag of money. But the seller, in both those examples, the seller's pretty much done once they sell the property. Now with a land contract, or if you think this contract for deed, the buyer and the seller enter into a contract where the seller says, I agree to take maybe $50,000. The buyer says, I'll give you $10,000 of that down, and then I'll pay you $500 a month until I fully paid you, and there's usually an interest component as well. And then when it's fully paid, the seller would give the deed to that buyer. So if you think of land contract, contract for deed as essentially synonyms, then it might be easier to understand the concept. And hopefully, did we lose anybody on that? Or
No, that's good. It's contract for deed in the West.
Yeah.
So seller financing. So if you're basically not in America, it would be like if you decided to sell your car, but they didn't have all the money. So instead of giving you $5,000 for the car, they would make $500 a month payment, and maybe ended up being $7,500 for the car over a certain number of years. Only apply that to real estate. So
yeah, essentially the seller is financing the sale of the property themselves. Now there's a lot of twists and certainly regulations with it. Obviously, if the seller still owes money on the property they're selling, you've got to make sure that that's paid off, or that they're not violating the terms of that contract by selling it. So there's more than just the basics to know, but we've got to start with a foundation. And when I was starting out in 1988, I barely understood what they were myself, but now I've got a pretty good handle on it, but I still learn something new every day.
Well, now you also don't just buy land contracts, you buy notes and real estate and lots of other things, correct?
Correct, yeah. In fact, you were joking as far as how to define a land contract, and you might want to call it an endangered species now. It's not quite extinct, but because of a number of reasons. One is the increased regulation. Another is just the market and economics. When anyone with a pulse could get a mortgage, there weren't a lot of people that were buying on land contract at that time. But coming out of the Carter years, when interest rates were 19 and 20, and it was very difficult for people to get mortgages, there were a lot of land contracts that were originated in those days, in the 70s, early 80s. And and I came in the business in '88, so there was still a lot going on. And in Michigan, it's part of our culture. There's been generations of land contracts, and many people, know what they are. In fact, many people will even use it as a verb. I land contracted my house to these people.
Actually, I've read several journals, even Abraham Lincoln. I read everything they found that he's written, and even he mentioned land contracts and the literature back then. It actually looks like that's how land in the Midwest has been bought and sold and financed for dozens of generations and at least a couple hundred years, probably longer. It seems to have just a real deep history here. I'm originally from out west, and I've traveled the world, and seller financing is not a common thing, and nobody knows what it is out here. But even the layman in Detroit, riding his bicycle and walking on the street, knows what a land contract is. It's synonymous, it's part of the culture here. And I'm going to come back to the endangered species part.
Okay.
At a later date. But so, when you and your father started, and then he kind of pulled you in, it was a good time for land contracts, because as you mentioned, with the late 70s and early 80s, we're not friendly to the Midwest in general, but particularly anywhere along the Rust Belt and with interest rates. Could you just explain, 2 or 3 minutes, something like that, what it was like then, what the lending environment was like, what the real estate environment was like?
Sure. Well, let me start. My dad's a dentist. He's retired now. He sold his practice, and he, like a lot of businessmen and women that have, persevered and survived, there were different things he did over the years, and he dabbled in real estate, and in some cases real estate was good, and then real estate wasn't so good during certain times, but dentistry might have been better. And so he went through those ebbs and flows and feast and famine, but particularly during the Rust Belt years, when you had economic problems and unemployment and sky high interest rates. I was in high school and starting college, even middle school, I guess, in the 70s. I just turned 50 this year, for everyone to know. But in any event, real estate, what we didn't have was depression of prices like we had in the last recession, but prices had never really upticked that high. There wasn't aggressive appreciation in the 70s. But what happened is the interest rate, the prime rate was 19 or 20. So if you think of, people might not have had jobs, and if they did, the amount of income that would be required and what the payment would be, where interest rates used to be 4 or 5 or 6, and then they went up to 19, just the idea of qualifying at that rate was difficult. Now the positive thing is that many people that owed on their houses had mortgages that were assumable, so they could sell on land contract without triggering a due on sale clause. This might have just gone from a 100 class to a 400 level class. But in any event, so many people would sell their house on a land contract. Maybe they owed $25,000, and then they'd sell it for $39,900 with $5,000 down. They'd be receiving a payment of $450 a month, and their payment on their underlying mortgage was $250 a month. So it allowed them to move on with that down payment. They could, maybe move to Texas where the jobs were, but it allowed people, to move on. And it was really the only way people could sell their houses in those days, because the buyers couldn't qualify for those high rate mortgages.
Okay, so let's talk about real quick before we move on. So were all the mortgages back then assumable, or most of them assumable? And then please explain what an assumable mortgage
Okay.
is, because that is a dinosaur now in
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah, well, prior to 1986, there were a number of mortgages that were assumable. What an assumable mortgage is let's say you borrow money from the bank to buy a house, and it's typically a 15 or 30-year mortgage. Well, in modern day mortgages, there's a clause in there. It used to be known as paragraph 17, but it's moved to 18 in some of the mortgages, and I'm not sure what number it is right now. But basically, in the modern day mortgages, there's a clause in there that says if you convey the property to someone else, in other words, transfer the ownership by any means, that mortgage is due in full at that time. And the reason is, it's because of the predicament that happened in the 70s and late 80s, where banks had loaned money for long term, maybe at 4, 5, 6%, but yet because of market conditions, they were giving depositors 14 and 15% on savings account. It's sort of unheard of now, and it was a recipe for disaster for the banking system. So banks started writing mortgages with due on sale clauses, and there were some lawsuits. I've actually brought some paperwork on there in case the questioning went there. But at the end result, the Supreme Court ruled that these due on sale clauses are valid. And there might be some gurus out there teaching ways to get around it.
Trust, whatnot,
yeah. But most of the research I've done on it, and I've done a lot, some of it is an expert witness or preparation for being an expert witness against some of these guys, are that they're really not on solid ground, because there's an element of concealment. And then also you can sort of look at it as the golden rule. I was reading one article where, let's say if you lent someone your car, you lend it to that person to give it back to you. And it wasn't under the condition that they could then loan it to someone else to use. So, I mean, there's some basic, good faith agreement. If you sign something saying if you sell, if you give that car to someone else or give that house to someone else, they get paid back. You should abide by that. So some of it, other people may teach things that I think the lesson from this is, like you said at the beginning, talk to your lawyer before you start doing something.
Always. So this mid to late 70s and early 80s, economy sucks, interest rates are sky high, bank has all this money out, 4 or 5%, and now they got to give interest rates 14, 15%, and new loans are going out high teens, low 20s. Do you remember what the highest was?
I think 19 or 20 is the biggest I remember hearing about. Now you have to keep in mind I graduated high school in '83, and things started to get better shortly thereafter. So it wasn't like I was shopping for a mortgage then, but I do remember the headlines, and and I remember watching the news and things like that. But I wasn't following things as closely as I do now.
Well, no, you were a kid. Reagan basically became a Keynesian and dumped a bunch of money and lowered the interest rate on the market, right? But your father, and then you, adroitly, figured out that everybody had to get rid of these houses and to move to where the opportunity was. Many of them sold on land contracts, and astutely and adroitly, you and your father said, hey, they would probably rather have a bag of cash instead of this trickle of monthly payments. And so, at that point, Dr. Daniels and Son was born. Is that basically how it went? Or?
Well, it goes back a little further than that, because the idea of buying notes and buying contracts, probably, I haven't done the exact research that you have, but probably is as old as Lincoln as well, is that there were, when contracts were, created and, between sellers and buyers in those days, there were probably times where sellers, for whatever reason, decided that they would rather have cash at some point. There were some sellers that were totally happy getting the monthly payments, but others, if they had their druthers, would rather have cash. So, the idea of buying contracts is a rather old one. And as far as going back in our family, I mentioned my grandfather, who I never met. He died my dad's last year at dental school, shortly before my dad graduated. But he was an engineer and real good with figures, as I mentioned, and you know, in the Depression, you know, in the 30s, to help make ends meet, he moonlighted at a local real estate office in Detroit on the weekends and evenings. And in those days, many times, let's say an individual sold their house on land contract. Well, if they're working in a factory or, you know, on a streetcar or whatever they did, elevator operator, blacksmith, what, you know, they didn't have a lot of time, and maybe they didn't have the education to, you know, to do the figuring as far as what people owed. So generally, the local real estate brokers would service the land contracts. The buyers would make their payments, and maybe the real estate agent would charge 50 cents out of a $90 payment, or 50, whatever a monthly payment was back then.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, but that was probably a lot of money, you know. But in any event, but then my grandfather, you know, would do the amortizations and help the real estate broker keep track. And being an engineer, that wasn't hard work. And because there weren't, you know, apps or HP calculators, a lot of the land contracts, I think, were 5% in those days. I think that was the usury limit in Michigan. Then it went up to 7 and then 11. But you could figure pretty easily what 6% was, because, you know, it's 0.5% a month. You know, you'd figure 1% a month and then half it. So there were shortcuts that, you know, engineers would do in their head. And then, so you knew what 6% was, and you could figure what 1% was. So you'd take the 6 and then subtract the 1, and then you knew what the interest was. And it was a lot easier, you know, that way you could get through more work in a day. So my dad, being a kid, he was born in the mid-30s, 34. And, you know, so he would hear his father talking about this, and then I think when his father, you know, got a little bit of savings, he bought a contract. And, you know, so my dad listened, and then when my dad became a dentist and, you know, was able to save up, probably first he bought a car, but, you know, but he started investing, you know, buying contracts. He also did some land development, which essentially stopped. Nobody was buying or building new houses in the Carter years either. Yeah. But, you know, like I said, I mean, my dad, you know, probably, you know, very astute businessman, and was a success in a lot of different things, but primarily was a dentist.
And he just, well, see, for anybody listening who has children too, you should talk about real estate in front of your kids, obviously, 3 generations. If you're wondering, I would highly recommend that, because they listen, apparently. They're paying attention.
Well, and I knew that probably in 5th grade, I think it was, when we dissected some animal in science class, that I wasn't going to be suited to be a dentist, because I ended up horizontal on the floor, you know, the first time I saw
dentistry is not for
and I'm
me.
like, okay, you know. So it turned out, and my dad and I never talked about working together, and you used the word pulled me in, but he certainly didn't push me in, and I don't know if there was any conscious effort, but if there's a lesson there, you know, I guess for, you know, I just sort of observed, and he was always a good role model to me, or for me, and you know, and then as I learned more about real estate, you know, talked to him more as an adult, you know, I found that especially since AT&T has never called back to tell me their hiring freeze has been lifted.
Maybe it hasn't.
Yeah, I know.
They haven't hired anybody in 30 years.
They should give me a discount on my cell phone at least, because I was going to work for them.
You hear that, AT&T?
Yeah. In any event, you know, I remember a conversation like it was yesterday with my dad, because I got my real estate license, and I put, you know, that 1 or 2 deals together that summer from cold calling people. And I remember I had like a little T-chart like you read about, the pros and the cons, and I had said to my dad, I said, in an ideal situation, I would have an opportunity to learn a lot and potentially earn a lot. I like the rhyme there. And I said, but most importantly, would have someone that would be, you know, like my supervisor or mentor, but that would have my own development in mind rather than using me as a stepping stone for his own career. And I said, I know it sounds corny, but that would be with you, Dad. And that was December of '88, and then, you know, at the end of that conversation, he says, I guess we'll put you on the payroll starting in January. And, you know, so it's, you know, like I said, a lot of fathers and sons don't last the first week. We've been fortunate, and then after a couple years, he started spending the winter in Florida, and I took that as a real compliment. Of course, he was just a phone call and a fax machine, I'm dating myself, away. But, you know, it's really worked well between the two of us. He jokes that it's the old form of Social Security, where I do all the work and he gets all the money.
That's
so,
right.
You know, so it works for...
So if you have kids, that's something to think about.
Kids do the work, the dad gets all the money, so.
Yeah. Well, so that summer, you put a couple deals together while you're waiting in limbo. Fortunately, AT&T never called you back. Do you remember your first deal?
Yeah, I do. It was a vacant lot that a couple living in Birmingham had sold. The lot was on a canal off of Walnut Lake in West Bloomfield Township, and I learned a ton of about real estate from that one deal. I cold called the people, and I didn't find this out until after. It was at the closing when I had the guts to ask them why they said yes or whatever. And they said, we normally hang up on people calling, or I don't even know if they called it telemarketing in those days, but they said there was something genuine about me. And I said, well, what was that? They said, well, when we asked you a question, you just said, I don't know, let me ask my dad and call you back. And I said, well, I probably couldn't think of anything else to say other than the truth. He said, well, that was the key, was the truth. And, so that was one big thing I learned. The other was that the way this lot was situated, of course, my dad didn't want to just say, okay, you put a deal together, here's a check, go buy it. I learned about due diligence. And it was a vacant lot that did not have enough frontage to be buildable under the most recent ordinance. However, it turned out to be buildable because the lot was created when the current ordinance, it pre-existed it. It's grandfathered, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, and you figured that out in your diligence period.
Yeah, so did, obviously the buyer that bought it from them. Of course, we were just buying the paper, in other words, this couple that I talked to had sold the lot to an end buyer that was going to build his canal friend home someday. They decided rather than collecting monthly payments from him and then waiting till he got a construction loan to pay off, they'd rather have this bag of money we were talking about, so they said yes. And so we shook hands on a number, and then I had to make sure that the lot was worth it, and then also that if this person that bought it from them that would now be making payments to us, if they didn't pay, would I be left with a worthless lot that could only be sold to one of the two neighbors for extra yard, or was it truly a building site? Did it have mass market appeal? So how did I find this out? Well, I talked to some real estate professionals in the area, and then I also had to talk to the township. And it was in West Bloomfield. Their township hall at the time was the old township hall on Orchard Lake Road, which is now the museum. Because they built a new complex, which is huge, but this was like this little picture a one-room schoolhouse, so it was pretty cramped. And I went in and talked to them, and they said, well, what can we do for you? They didn't say Sonny, but that's what I felt like. I said, well, I'm here for this reason, and I was hoping that you could provide me with a letter saying that this lot is buildable. And they said, well, you'll have to show us first, and then we'll decide whether we can write a letter. So I said, what do I have to show you? Well, you have to show me that the lot was not owned by it did not have a common ownership with any of the adjacent lots since the ordinance change. In other words, you can't create a non-conforming lot, but if it pre-existed, if it was truly grandfathered and had a distinct ownership chain through the years, then it would meet the criteria for still being buildable. So I went down to Oakland County, and this is where I learned even more. And because this chain of title was so old, I had to go down in the basement. Now, security, you may not be able to go there anymore, but they might send someone down. So I learned about all these restrictive covenants that they're not constitutional, but of course they're on these old deeds, and and I learned while I was waiting, that summer I also took my 40-hour class, so I learned about this stuff, but here I am seeing it. So anyway, I pay the $1 a copy, and I've got this stack of documents. I drive back to the old township hall, bring it to this guy, and he says, okay, well, you've got the chain of title for this property, for the one to the left and the one to the right, but we also need, you know, on the front and back. And I said, well, there's a canal and there's a road. And they said, well, technically, you know, you own to the middle of the canal, or the person would, and to the middle of the street, and we need to know that it wasn't split from there. I said, well, that seems sort of odd, because I mean, you know, why would they split there? It would always be split. Well, you know, so I learned about government.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's common sense versus, you know, and of course this person, he doesn't want to put a letter on letterhead without checking it out because he could lose his job. So I learned a little bit about, or a lot about empathy too, because I'm trying to figure out why he's doing this. And it's not just to be, you know, mean, although my first reaction is, look, common sense, come on.
Yeah, it's a canal.
But I mean, there, you know, if he's ever questioned, he's got to show that he did this. Now, he may also been, you know, seeing how long I would persevere, and maybe it would be one less thing to do if I never came back. But anyway, I knew where to go. I went back to the county, got those. And then sure enough, they wrote sort of a cryptic letter eventually, but it said you're non-conforming, illegal, I mean, you know, lot, you know, provided, you know, you can show, and I think there was sewer system there, but provided you can show, you know, access to potable water and waste disposal system, which was pretty easy because you had city water and sewer, would, upon approval by our building department, be eligible for a building permit. I mean, you know, I would have preferred, yes, your lot's buildable, but, you know, we had people that, you know, read better than 24-year-old, no, I think I was still only 23, you know, interpret that, and we felt we were on solid ground. So I really, you know, from that first deal, I learned so much that it's really, can be somewhat complicated, but also, you know, you're spending or investing your own money. I mean, even though it was my dad writing the check, and we're talking about maybe a $30,000 deal, it's hard to believe a canal front lot. That's what, you know,
that's worth a little bit more now.
Yeah, but meanwhile, I learned so much from that, and you know, but you're investing your family money. I don't want to let my dad down. I don't want to let, you know, my boss down, who's the same person. Want to, you know, learn, do a good job, and also I'm getting paid based on my, you know, or at least keeping my job, you know, based on doing a good job. And I sort of liked it. I didn't really mind going to the county. I was interested in reading that. And it doesn't seem like work when you're interested in it. And then, you know, obviously getting paid is nice. And it seems, you know, most of it's been fun over the years.
Okay. Do you happen to remember some of the numbers about that deal?
I think if I remember correctly, they, you know, they might have sold the property for $55,000 with 10 down. Original balance of $45,000. I think it was paid down to about 40, and I don't know. I think we offered them, you know, somewhere around 35 for the 40. I mean, it wasn't a huge discount, but the contract was, you know, due to pay off within a, you know, a couple of years. But we felt that the property had gone up in value since they bought it, so it was a safe investment. I do remember the contract was written at 10 or 11%, because in those days that's about what they all were written at. I remember the fellow's name that bought it. He was a builder, but he was going to build his own house on, and I remember that he ended up missing a couple payments, or it was the balloon payment, and we ended up giving him an extension. And you know, so I remember, you know, a lot of details about that one. So,
okay, do you, just if you don't mind, do you remember what the yield was after you got the discount?
Well, I think, you know, just sort of doing it quickly in my head, it was probably, you know, in the mid-teens. You know, if you figure you're taking a coupon rate of 10 or 11 and you're discounting a little bit, you know, even not knowing how many years were left, you know, it would give you, you know, something like that. I mean, it wasn't like we were doubling our money or anything. But, you know, it was, we felt, the main thing we've always looked at, you know, ahead of yield is the safety of the money we're investing. What happens if we don't get
question.
Yeah, okay.
What do you think the property was worth, and what were you and your father in at?
Well, the key to this was if it was buildable, because if we couldn't ascertain that it was buildable, then, you know, really the only value was the neighbor to the right and the neighbor to the left. The guy across the street or the guy on the other side of the canal, they wouldn't really want it. So in that case, you know, it didn't have much value at all, but a building site on a canal on Walnut Lake, I mean, even though what did we call it, sold for 55 with 10 down, it was probably seasoned a couple years and things were going up in the late 80s, the economy was decent. You know, so it was probably, I mean, we might have thought it was minimum, you know, 70 or something at that time. But we also, you know, you have to factor in, it's not like if the guy misses a payment, you know, you get the property back and you sell it with no cost the next day. I mean, if the person didn't pay us, we have to, you know, have an attorney go through a process or pay the attorney,
Wait,
you know, to write a letter.
There's no free lunch?
There's no free lunch.
There's no free lunch,
Yeah.
I'm so disappointed.
Yeah, and then even though I had a real estate license, I mean, I, you know, really didn't know the first thing about selling lots, and even today we still retain, you know, we'll hire an expert, you know, real estate broker in a particular area because they've got the connections of other brokers and buyers that want to buy that. So, you know, yes, we pay commissions. I enjoy paying commissions to licensed brokers because that means the deal's closing.
Yeah. So you had a piece of property you thought that what you determined was buildable was probably worth 60 to 70, and you guys were in at 30.
Yeah, we were in you know, probably
35.
between 30 and 35 and
mid-teens yield, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that's almost half.
Yeah.
And getting a mid-teens yield.
Yeah,
So if you wonder, people are wondering why at home, like, wait, this is not as sexy as flipping or wholesaling. First of all, this is 1988. Second of all, you're talking about your own personal money, and I think you said it best, where you're more concerned about the security of the money you're investing over the yield.
Right.
And for those who are listening, if you invest $100,000 and then make a bad mistake and lose $50,000, to make that money up, you now have to get 100% return. Try and go and find 100% return. You just lost years for your investment. So this is a very different way than I'm sure a lot of the gurus or whatever you've been watching on the internet, whatever books you've been reading. But if you're wondering what the appeal to this is, it's if you do it correctly, it's a very safe way, comparatively speaking. There's no safety. Consult a lawyer. One of the more conservative ways to invest your money in real estate.
Yeah, the thing to keep in the back of your mind also is that it's not truly passive. You know, it's not like, you know, going on the internet and buying a stock online and then, you know, what, of course, you know, you might not get the same yield, but I mean, my dad was paying me, you know, I don't know, $9 an hour or something at that time. But also, you know, there were a lot of hang-ups and, you know, rejection, you know, to find, I mean, that was 1 or 2 deals over a 3-month summer.
That was going to be my next
you know,
question.
so-
How many calls did you have to make, sir, to get those 2 deals?
Oh, I would, I mean, more than 100, I'd say. I mean, I was probably, I mean, you know, I don't know how many I'd make in a day, because sometimes you just get exasperated and you need to go for a walk. Or you're spending time going to look at a property or something like that. And I was also, you know, that first summer I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So, you know, I was also interviewing other places and waiting for AT&T to call again or
This is before the internet, so when you're going and doing all this stuff, you gotta get in your car, you gotta drive to the county building.
Yeah.
Gotta walk in, open boxes.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I remember going out to Macomb and, you know, before M59 was widened, you know, it would take quite a while to get out there. But they had, you know, we thought there might be a little less competition out there. And, you know, so I think I ended up, they called it East Detroit at the time, but I think my second deal, I don't remember that one quite as well, but that was a contract in East Detroit. And the reason I don't remember that one real well is I wasn't there for the closing. I had actually, for about 3 months in 1988, I worked for New York Life. And I learned a good lesson there is that my peers who had just graduated college were more interested in going to happy hour than they were in talking financial planning and annuities and, you know, life insurance. And then my dad's peers and contacts, you know, saw me as a kid. So even though I could call maybe other dentists or, you know, people that my dad knew through the years, I ran out of friends, relatives, and contacts very quickly. I might be better at, if I want to go into life insurance now as an older person, but I think, so there was a little interlude. I did, try something, and I learned some things there about needs analysis selling and versus hard selling, and I still use, those lessons to this day, but it wasn't a good fit for a 23, 24-year-old.
So I've made probably tens of thousands of calls at this point, so I'm curious about this. Anybody who's ever made this many calls, probably curious too. Do you remember what you said when you were doing these cold calls? Do you still have the script in your head?
Oh boy, I'd have to go back into the cobwebs here. I can hear the old mechanical hard drive. If it was solid state, it'd be better.
Lay some smooth Daniels on me here.
Well, I think it wasn't very smooth at all, and based on what that initial seller said, I think that's what might have worked. Is the authenticity is that I didn't sound like the people that were rehearsed, but what I can recall is, I did make some notes, and I said, my name's Allan Daniels. My dad, Dr. Daniels, is a dentist here in Pontiac, which is where we were, as an investment for himself. My dad buys land contracts, and through public record, and I might even said in the phone book, I'm calling you to see if you'd rather have cash than, receiving the monthly payments.
Would you rather have a big old bag of cash instead of that small
I might
trickle of
have
payments?
learned to say lump sum, or you try different things, or cash now.
Like
but
turn that small little stream of payments into a whopping pickup truck of cash?
Yeah. But, so, and sometimes people would say, that the person already paid off, or, the data wasn't that good too, because, that usually the address on the contract was of a house that they had sold, and you didn't necessarily know where they moved. So there were a lot of wrong numbers, busy signals, or you're leaving messages, and they were answering machines, not voicemail in those days. But, and you don't even know if you got the right person. And again, today, I don't want anybody to think they can go out and do this, because the telemarketing sales laws, you'd have to have a list and scrub that list with the do not call list, because there's I don't know if it's 5,000 a day or whatever the fines are. So that would not be my business plan, today. We don't actually do any telemarketing today. But, I did learn a lot from it, and I guess that would be, if I had a script, that's what I can recall of it.
That's old school right there. So you basically spent the first summer just making all these cold calls, driving around, going through dusty records and all that, trying to piece together.
And it's funny, we had a little classified ad too, and we still do a little bit of newspaper advertising, which is archaic, but my dad got the easy ones. He would get the calls in, and I did the call out. He made the rules.
What better way to learn, though, right?
Yeah.
Throw you right in the fire.
Well, it was funny too, because the dental office was still active at the time, so I was in a little, had a desk, and there was a little partition, but people could hear me, and there was a woman that had worked for my dad for a long time, and she was processing insurance claims on, and she told my dad one time she had my pitch better, she had it memorized. She said, it was funny, but I think she actually went up, because, this is someone, when I was 4 years old and would come in and ride the dental chairs. I mean, can you imagine your kid, let's say you got $1,000 piece of equipment, and I'm using it as a toy.
Yeah.
But my dad never said anything. But, now I'm looking at, you really let us do that? But,
good insurance.
But, must be. Or we probably thought they were pretty durable, or a good warranty. But, again, the woman that worked for my dad for a long, long time, she'd seen me, maybe as a 4 or 5 year old, and now I'm, 23 working. So, I think she probably was, giving my dad her grade or assessment.
Ah, okay.
So the fact that I would survive another week was always a good sign.
That is. I remember when I started, it is very difficult. It's easy to get down. You don't know what you're doing. In your case, you had someone who'd been doing it for a while, and someone you trusted, your father, but it was still difficult probably, right? That first year was that the hardest, or?
Yeah, I think, you never really get, in this profession, you never really get 100% confident, because there's always something else that, you don't know, or, that could go wrong. But I think in the beginning, you know, you don't know what you don't know. I remember, you know, still not really knowing myself what the difference between discount and yield was.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
you know, and I, so each time, you know, it was, you know, okay, I got someone that sounds interested. Okay, well, what do I do next? Well, how about you ask them what the terms of the contract? Oh, that's a good idea. I'll call back. You know, I mean, so this was really baby steps.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the terms. Okay, well, let's figure out. Do they know what's owing now? Well, they didn't tell me. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's run an amortization. You know, so my dad and I would do that. You know, so you think about, you know, the patience required from him. And I remember we had a dot matrix printer. And you know, I would print it out and I put it in the file. Well, of course, you've got this extra half-inch holes on each side, you know. And you know, I'd watch my dad and he'd tear them off, and I'm like, oh, well, that's a good idea. They fit in the folder now. And also, you know, while I'm not, I still have things to learn about organizational. Diane is our bookkeeper's in the other room, and she would give an amen to that. So, but meanwhile, I learned, you know, I mean, obviously, if you're in medical or dental, you want to have, you know, organized records. So it was just a mental note. Okay, even the simple things as far as tearing off, you know, the holes. I mean, neatness counts. You know,
Yeah,
so you try to, you know, little things. And I hadn't thought about that in years until you brought it up. But it was really baby steps, and you know, what's this, and asking a lot of questions. And I really, you know, I learned to appreciate my dad, you know, exponentially more than I did as a kid, because I didn't really understand, you know, what went behind supporting a family. I mean, I was a kid, you know, I was fortunate enough to have, you know, there was dinner. You know, and
roof over the head.
Yeah, I had a roof over my head, and you know, my dad would go to work early and stay late because there were patients, and then Saturdays they were open. You know, so there were little league games that, you know, maybe he didn't come to, and you know, and then, you know, so it was really eye-opening. It's like, oh, well, now I really learn, you know, why. I mean, this is really everything that went behind, you know, making sure that we did have a roof over our head. And you know, I was single at the time, and my wife and I were dating. We met in college, but you know, I did figure out, you know, someday I'd be married and have a family, and it's like, okay, you know, this is really someone not just business-wise to emulate, but there's really a lot of things I can learn. And you know, it's been a great ride over the years. And you know, my dad and I, you know, still go out and look at property together, and you know, really cherish all those times together.
Next time you're doing that, just do me a favor, and I don't know if you think about it, take a picture of you and your dad when you're out doing that, and maybe, I don't know, consider posting it to Facebook.
Okay.
Or, I just think that's so cool. But so I realized I got so interested in talking. Let's back up a little bit here. Let's just make up a deal and walk through it, and let's walk through the terminology. I know a lot of people listening probably know this, but what I'm afraid is there might be people in Europe or China, they don't know. We're talking about yields, amortizations,
Okay.
all this stuff, and how to analyze a deal. So let's just make up a deal, and let's just analyze it. So, boy, you're probably better at this than I do. You want to make up a deal?
Yeah, I wish it was this easy to just make up a deal. But
make up a deal.
the first thing we do to make up a deal is we stare at the phone and see if it rings. If
Yeah.
anybody's gonna call.
Somebody call in.
Look at your email inbox and see if you get any of those Weber or some sort of, somebody fills out a
I don't have to completely make up a deal. I can
Okay.
throw somewhat of a deal out
Okay.
there. I was actually going to call you about this. So
Okay.
I won't mention address
Okay.
or anything like that, but there's a property in Taylor with a seller. He sold it on a land contract, and the property's probably worth about 30 to 35,000 as a wholesale rate,
Okay.
right? So it's 45 to 55 retail, 30 to 35,000 wholesale, if it's in perfect condition. And he sold it on land contract, and the guy, I don't have necessarily all the terms, we can maybe make them up, but the guy still owes 7 or 8,000 left,
Okay.
and has been missing payments and not making payments.
On
for
the
last
underlying
year and a half.
mortgage?
On
Okay.
the underlying
Okay.
amount, yeah.
Okay.
So this old man, he had it as a rental for a long time, and then didn't want to sell it because he didn't want to take, he'd been depreciating it, and if he sold it for cash, he was gonna have a huge tax issue, so he decided to sell on installment payments on a land
Okay.
contract.
Did he sell it to another landlord, or he sold it to a homeowner?
He sold it to a homeowner,
Okay.
and he probably didn't know what he was doing. He's an old man, he's like 81, like a Marine.
Okay.
You go to his, I went to his house on accident because I put in the wrong address, and it's got like an American flag in the yard, and a Marine flag, and his lawn's perfect, and his house is perfect, his garage perfect, his car's perfect. But he's also ancient. Anyway, he owes like the land contract, the guy who took the land contract out with him, owes like 7 or 8,000 left on this.
Okay, so when did he sell, he sold the house on contract when, do you remember?
5 to 7 years ago.
Okay, so prior to the SAFE Act and prior to Dodd Frank?
I hope so.
Yeah, okay, it sounds like it.
Otherwise, he has some toilet paper, right?
Yeah, well, it's just, there's, we talked about due diligence, on my first deal. I mean, I knew about usury and, we saw what interest rate it was written at, but now the degree of due diligence as far as compliance is exponentially, more stringent, I guess, would be
And I'm not gonna let you go before we talk
Yeah,
about it. But,
so, okay, so this one, so he sold, do you remember what he sold it for 7 to 8 years ago?
I think he said 30,000.
Okay, and then it's paid down to like 7 now?
7 or 8. He couldn't
7
exactly
to 8
remember.
is what's owing.
Yeah.
Okay, and this person that's buying it from him is paying him how much, do you know, the monthly payment?
$500 a month, I believe.
Okay, that's principal and interest, and he pays his own taxes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then do you know the interest rate?
He couldn't remember.
Okay.
He couldn't remember.
Okay.
So we can make that up if you'd like.
Well, why don't you make, for the purpose of this podcast, rather than us wait for
Yeah,
email to
yeah.
come in with a copy of the contract?
Let's say 10%.
10%.
That seems reasonable for a land contract, right?
We still see some at that. We've seen most of them be lower than that over the past number of years because mortgage interest rates are lower. Usually you still see land contract rates higher than mortgages, but we don't necessarily see them, at the top end anymore. But 78,500 a month. And did he give you an idea what he wanted for it?
He said he would take what was left of what was owed.
Okay, so
would
he
take
wants
it.
to sell it for the face amount.
Yes.
Now, has he talked to the buyer about just the buyer getting a loan and paying him off?
Yes, that's apparently been the promise for like the last year and a half, 2 years. He's been dragging it out, and it's like every 4th or 5th month, like a $500 payment comes in. And he said if it was 5 years ago, he just would have started the paperwork, kicked him out, thrown him out on the street, and now he says he's old and
Okay.
he doesn't want to deal with it.
So it's a spotty payment record, so the person couldn't qualify anyway.
Right at this point, at least for the last year and a half,
Okay,
correct.
so, but not necessarily non-performing, but
Poorly performing.
Poorly performing, good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, on this one, the way I'd analyze it is, certainly from a collateral perspective, even on the 35,000 quick cash value, so to speak, or wholesale, I think, I wouldn't worry if somebody owed me 7,000 to 8,000, if, that I'd be stuck with something, that if I owned it, is only worth 3,000, So I think in that case, there's peace of mind that the collateral is there. The tough thing with these smaller contracts, though, is that the amount of effort or TLC or,
Oh, yeah.
Involved and just supporting your overhead, postage, it takes up such a large, and then also if they're not paying on time, it's gonna take a lot of, we call it high touch, a lot of phone calls and our goal wouldn't be to end up with the property, our goal would be to receive payments if we bought it. So on this one, it'd be difficult to look into this one because it would be very time consuming, it sounds like, and it would almost, I don't think I'd be very close to the figure he wanted if I were to buy it.
Well, let's add a 0 to it. Let's add a 0 to both.
Okay.
If you make
Okay.
it 300,000
Okay.
and 70, 80,000,
Well, then from a time perspective, I think that's a very good point. Is you're allocating time to something that is going to help you pay your bills. I've got, one in college and another one, in middle high school. So, you're looking at, those needs, not wants, but sort of needs. And, you want to look at how you allocate your time towards, deals, so to speak, that are going to help you, reach those goals. So is your time better spent, chasing something that you might get lucky to make, a couple thousand versus something that's going to give you income and a return on investment for the next, several years. So for example, if you focus too much on yield, and I know I'm not answering the question directly, but I'm analyzing it. If you focus on yield, you probably get a real good yield if you bought that $8,000 contract. Let's say the gentleman would take $6,000 for it.
I'm sure he would.
Or even if he would take $5,000 or $5,500. I mean, it's a sky high yield, but it's equivalent sometimes. Let's say, I gave you $1 today, and then you gave me $2 back tomorrow. Well, I made 100% on my money, and then if you annualize it, it's it's going to come up as error on my calculator because it's so high. But meanwhile, if I want to go, to Starbucks, I can't afford anything on the menu.
No, you can't.
So,
you can't duplicate it either.
Yeah. So that's the problem when you just look at yield rather than dollars. So I'd rather, if you move the decimal point, I'd rather, first of all, my security is still there. I've got an $80,000 receivable on a home that, or real, let's say it's even commercial property, as long as it's not like something very unique like the Silverdome. But in any event, you've got a highly marketable property that's worth $350,000. Somebody's going to owe me 80 at 10%. I mean, it's really just, what discount do you think is fair? Okay, do I need to calculate exactly what it was? No, I mean, I know it's better than 10. And it's first of all, and also the chance of default, even though he's paying spotty, first of all, if things, I might just put up with the spotty, or sometimes when they see that it's not an amateur, that it's a company, but also that we're local. If they call up, we're going to answer the phone. It's not going to customer service, on the moon or or wherever.
Yeah, stuck in that loop of
they're going to, they're also going to see that, oh, okay, well, the reason they're paying spotty is because when they were sending checks, they were coming back on, or they were never getting cash. Why? Well, because this guy is close to retirement age. He went on a 2-month cruise, or he went to go visit his brother in California. So the reason they're spotty is because they didn't know where to send the payments. Now that we're here, if they have a question, or maybe the guy does want to pay off, but, he's worried about how's he going to get a payoff letter to a title company. So many times we've been, we've been pleasantly surprised that when we buy a contract, they start paying better. Because first of all, they see we're local. Now, change can be stressful for anyone, but I think we do a very good job communicating that the contract stays exactly the same. The only thing that's going to change is where you mail your payments. Don't do anything different until you get something signed by the current holder and myself. There's a phone number, So I think, that would work. So what would I pay for that? Basically, the nice thing about this type of thing is I just have a conversation and say, what do you want? And if he's realistic, we'd make a deal. I'm not going to lose something that sounds so good just because I wasn't able to get another $50 out of it.
No, that's good. So the first thing you do is like, okay, is it worth the effort? You know what your needs are and your desires and what the amount of effort it takes. That's the first determination you make before you do anything else. Is like, okay, like the first one was too small, you'd probably pass on that, right?
Well, yeah, but I'd also call the person back. I wouldn't just throw it away. I mean, I would explain that to them. And if the answer was, I really, I've made enough money from this house, I just don't want it. I don't have any kids. I just want to be done with it. This person, they were my tenant before they bought it. It's going to be their house real soon. I mainly, just want to see that their needs are met, and I'll just give it to you. I mean, you never know. I mean, that's never happened in this many years, But it's possible that they recognize the same things I do. Maybe this guy was in business and he understands, it's small and, it's very time intensive. And he may say, look, I've already made enough out of this property over the years. I don't need every last cent out of it myself. Allan, you're not gonna offend me. Tell me what you would pay. And, and in that case, maybe the conversation would go a little further.
Okay.
And, and when I,
So you're looking for motivation too?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything. I mean, if I'm not gonna, if it is low-hanging fruit, or if it is something where, we can help that person get from point A to point B, I'm not gonna say, oh, it's too small, just, without knowing more. But my first reaction is, if let's say I've got, 2 voicemails that I listen to relatively the same time, or 2 emails.
This guy gets called second.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah,
I get that a lot. So, check. You're constantly monitoring your effort, how much effort you're putting into them, and then you're checking for essentially motivation. So you're looking at you have a good idea what you need to get.
Yeah, and then
motivation, right?
Yeah, and then also, I mean, there's, if this is a single-family home, it's a little easier to evaluate than, let's say somebody's got I joked about the Silver Dome, but somebody's got a very unique property. You move the decimal point, yeah, but if let's say the person that's buying it, gets ill or wins the lotto or whatever, and they're not in that business anymore and they walk away, or they're trying to sell that property and it's a stadium or something weird, so their problem's going to become my problem. Whereas, in most cases, let's say, in this person, they're paying spotty, things get difficult for them, they owe $80,000, it's worth $350,000, they'll put it up for sale. Even if they end up selling it for $300, I'm not going to end up with it. They're going to, we're going to get paid off. So they're going to be able to solve the problem. But if they've got a unique property that can't be sold, or if there isn't much spread between what they owe and what the property's worth, then their problem may become my problem, and I have to look at that. Or if there's just no market, if somebody, we have done 1 or 2 deals over the years in the UP. Just to go look at it, that's going to kill a day. Where, I think you said this one is in Taylor. Well, I pretty much know how long it takes to get to the airport and back and forth. And, who knows, I might be driving, my son or my wife or somebody to go to the airport or something anyway.
Schedule it on that.
Yeah, and I can do it.
Okay, no, that's a good point. So you're also checking to see what kind of problem you're going to inherit.
Yeah.
Do you want to solve that problem, or can you solve that problem you can inherit?
Yeah, so I think, you're looking at, both things. You're looking at it, you try to look at it from your point of view, but then you also look at it from your seller's point of view, because the whole economy is based on, filling needs or making things win-win, or, whatever metaphor you want to use. I tend to say, tell me where you are at point A, where do you want to get to at point B? And sometimes it's economic, and sometimes it's really not economic. It's a burden. Well, why? People's tolerance. Sometimes somebody sells a house, they thought selling it on a land contract was a great idea because they'd get maybe 7% interest, whereas if they put their money into some other investment vehicle, they'd get 2 or 3. But then they're retired, they don't have, they've been in a stressful job their whole life, and they figure they'll retire to get rid of stress, but then they find out they still have the same amount of stress. Well, what's the stress? Well, the payment's due on the 1st, and it always comes on the 4th. And that, and they just can't stand it, and their spouse can't stand it, and it keeps them up at night. Well, I could probably live with that, and, I mean, especially if it always comes on that day. I mean, they're paying, it's probably based on when that person gets paid, and, we can deal with that. But on the other hand, I can certainly relate that if that's a pet peeve and they want to get rid of a pet peeve, and their financial situation is just fine, whether they hold this or don't hold it, how can I help you? Well, you get rid of this thing and give me a bag of money that I don't have to worry about,
Well, this guy is just tired, so
Yeah.
I think he would qualify as
Okay.
one of those people.
So this isn't totally made up, okay.
This is not made up. No.
Okay, well,
This
nobody,
is,
I got an option on that, so, yeah.
You're the only person I know who does this thing,
Okay.
so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But so let's back up a little bit. While we're talking about this deal, every profession has its own nomenclature, its own language. So can you kind of walk me through yield, amortization, all that, like, just so as we continue forward, we probably should have done this in the beginning now that I'm thinking about it, but hey, it's the first podcast.
All right, well, I should have brought a textbook.
Yeah, well,
give you,
just some of the basic ones, you know, for people who are listening and they don't know.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I was asked by, you know, by the time this airs, I'll probably know the answer. But I was asked whether I'd be interested in being an adjunct instructor at EMU this fall for a class, because I think the professor had a medical issue or something. So the department head is looking for someone, and an attorney friend of mine asked if I'd be interested. And I was reading the textbook over the weekend to see if I, you know, felt I could fill the shoes, and you know,
Little light reading.
yeah, well, it was, and my degree was in communication, so everything, you know, I've learned has been from experience or from reading, you know, like just on my own, or you know, to get licenses you have to read, you know, the text usually. So I may not, you know, be giving textbook answers to everything, but you know, yield I would describe as the, you know, the return on investment, you know, which, you know, would, you know, internal rate of return, or, you know, the interest rate plus, you know, the discount factor would give you your yield if you're buying a discounted note, similar to how you might price a bond. Of course, some bonds are purchased at a premium, you know, so that either going to confuse people more, or maybe explain that a little bit.
People probably know bonds actually better
okay.
than they know real estate.
Okay.
You would hope anyway, considering probably most of their retirement's in bonds.
Well,
right?
you know, they probably know they get a statement every month or quarter or year, and just look at the bottom line and hope they hope that the investment managers know about yield and bonds. But I don't know how many, you know, and so I think, you know, the yield is, you know, it's generally percentage based, telling you, you know, how your money supposedly is growing. Now that could be a negative as well, but you know, if somebody's doubling their money, that's 100% yield. You know, of course, you know, it could go down, and you know, and it could go up. But usually, you know, you're looking at a yield for a prospective investment. And now that you know, can we go on to something else yet?
Yeah, I'm just going to shoot a bunch. So like,
okay.
So we have land contract, note, promissory note, paper. These are all mortgage. These are all very similar instruments, and we kind of been using them back and forth.
Yeah, well, it's in the structure, how you build the transaction. Now, we talked about contract for deed and land contract a little bit at the beginning. Now, in Michigan, you know, if you're getting a loan from a bank, and an individual could do this too, you could also use a mortgage and a note. Now, a mortgage is another word for lien, so that would be the lien on the property, and the note is an IOU. So the reason there's both of them is the note by itself is just an IOU with no collateral. Well, a bank isn't going to loan in most cases without collateral, and neither should a person if the house was supposed to be the collateral. So the borrowing party would also sign a mortgage or a lien on the real estate as well. So that's where you have mortgage and note. But you know, a lot of times if you buy land contracts, you might call yourself a note buyer, you know, because you're buying someone's promise to pay, whether it's on a land contract form.
You're buying IOUs,
right? You're buying IOUs.
Secured IOUs.
Yeah.
Actually, probably a good way to say it for everybody
Very
listening.
good point. Yeah.
Yeah, purchasing secured IOUs.
Yes, and you have to look at, you know, and that's why you look at this look at everything from another angle to see what happens if they break the promise, if they don't pay on the IOU. You know, it's good if everything works like clockwork, but what happens if they don't pay? Is there any collateral? Okay, what is the collateral? Is it buildable, like in that example? Or do I even, you know, okay, I have a note and I have a mortgage. Well, is it signed where it's supposed to be signed? Did the right people sign it? Does it have the right dates? Does it even have the right property on it? Does it have a provision for what happens if they don't pay? You know, it says, I'm supposed to pay. Well, what happens if you don't? You know, we look for clarity, and these are all things we've learned over the years, but fortunately I learned a good bit of it on the first deal.
Yeah, just a quick pause here. How many land contracts or notes or IOUs, which actually now I'm thinking about it, we'll say IOU is also a promise to pay, because I'm just not sure how well that would translate in Europe or something like that. IOU, it's colloquial American English, so we'll say promise to pay too, so hopefully that makes sense for everybody listening. But I imagine a lot of land contracts, especially from mid-70s through the mid-80s, probably even today, based upon the number of people I've met, probably wrote their own land contract instead of maybe, or maybe they didn't hire a lawyer, they hired a real estate agent or something like that. Do you have any thoughts on that when you're looking through?
Well, I'd prefer that, you know, they would be written professionally. It's easier for me to, you know, to look for the clauses, you know. I'd say just the opposite though. At least from my personal observation of what I've seen, over the years,
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, they were more professionally done earlier in my career than now. And my explanation for that is because they were more prevalent, and because, you know, there weren't due on sale clauses to violate. You know, lawyers and title companies were involved in the transactions. They had, now they didn't have internet, you know, forms library, but they actually had like a room in the title company where they had all these forms, and they would go get their land contract form, whether it was ABC Title Company or XYZ Title Company, or, you know, this, you know, the Greater Michigan Association of, you know, Real Estate Brokers, they might have a form of land contract. You know, so you'd see, you know, in different areas of the state, you know, whether it was a title company form, a board of realtors form, you know, there was some standardization. And then, of course, some lawyers would do their own. Nowadays, because, you know, a lot of, again, and I don't have access to every land contract in Michigan, but a lot of what I'm seeing, and more as a percentage basis, is what I'll call the kitchen table type land contract. And part of that is because of the internet. People, you know, they see, okay, well, the title company could close it, but they're gonna charge, you know, $200-300. I can Google land contract and download this form, and even though it says prepared by law firm in Idaho, I'm gonna go ahead and use it. And even though it says sample right across or whatever. Wow. And, you know, so we see that, or we see handwritten things. And again, that documentation, everything's great if somebody's making their payments, but if somebody dies or doesn't make their payments or goes bankrupt, you're going to be relying on, you know, that document. And there used to be a commercial about, I think it was an air filter or something, you can pay me now or pay me later. It's a lot easier to pay a title company or attorney, and I'd recommend an attorney, knowledgeable attorney.
We always recommend attorneys.
Yeah. You know, to do it right the first time, rather than say, oh, you know, we forgot to, you know, put that decimal point there, or we forgot even the clause of, you know, of what happens if they don't pay. There's no ability to forfeit or foreclose on the land contract. Or, you know, you thought this was going to be 10 years. Did you even do the math to see that it doesn't even amortize, and, you know, and you got a problem here.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. I'm glad I asked that,
Yeah,
because I would have thought it would have been worse before. I know with the internet would be better,
yeah, but I think because there aren't a lot of land contracts, and even in title companies, you know, sometimes it's the veteran person that knows how to do them, and if that person's on vacation, and then you're relying on maybe the person that answers the phone, you know, to do that deal, and they're like, I've never done a land contract before. We do 1 or 2 a year,
yeah.
You know, versus, you know, the 70s, 80s when every other deal was a land contract and everybody knew. Again, it's it's just not as common. So, you know, and even the people that used to do a lot of them, like, I used to do a lot of them, but I'm not up to date on this anymore. And, you know, so you're seeing, you know, more issues because of that.
Okay, what about amortization? Because you used to actually do this by hand. This is pretty amazing.
Well, I didn't personally, but my grandfather, who I never met, you know, would do that.
Okay, your grandfather did it by hand.
But I mean, you can do it by hand, and I know how to do it. I mean, it's arithmetic. So, you know, let's say, I'm going to screw up the arithmetic, so I'll give you just the concept of it. But can I say screw up on your podcast?
Absolutely, you can say whatever you want.
No,
yeah.
That's mild. This is, for Jeremy, this is like getting it G-rated.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But in any event, let's say, someone owes you, or you owe someone $50,000 and it's at, 10% interest. So, and, so the amortization, the first month, 10% a year is what, $5,000 divided by 12. Maybe I should have done something with 6. But anyway, so you divide that by 12 and then you would know that monthly interest if it's computed monthly. And if their payment is, let's say that figure, and I'm going to get it wrong, but let's say that figure is $600. Might even be right. No, I don't think so. Because that's then if the payment's $700, then okay, if 600 of that $700 was interest that month, then there's a $100 principal reduction. So now the next month it's $49.9, and then you do it over again, and so that's where you have a principal reduction. So when someone takes out a 30-year mortgage, they work backwards, and with apps on your phone or with amortization programs, it's pretty easy. You figure 360 months, and then you solve for the payment. So, but if you were to do it by hand, and I actually, sometimes we'll spot check our servicing program, and yes, you need a special license to service land contracts in Michigan in most states. But we'll check it, or someone may want to do that at home. So what I just described to you, I have a little form that if somebody wants to know how to do that, they can do it by hand if they want to check. And the programs work pretty well, fortunately.
Thank God for apps. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. but once in a while, whether it could be a leap year, it could be something. You do find a bug in a program. Fortunately, we haven't found bugs in ours, but I've seen situations where usually it's key punching error. So, it's human error rather than than the actual program making an error. But it doesn't hurt to check it by hand sometimes, because it can be done with just arithmetic.
That's amazing. So here we are, 1989, January. Had you married your wife yet?
No.
Have you proposed?
I didn't propose until '93. So we started dating January of '87, and then got married in August of '94. So, but we've been married 21 years, and 2 wonderful kids, and
congratulations. So between 1989 and when you got married, had you still decided just to do this business, or were you just kind of, did it grow on you, or did it kind of pull you in like a black hole, or nothing else was available, or you just fell in love?
Well, I liked what I was doing, and then we grew the business a little bit. In 1990, we applied to the state to get our mortgage license. We had enough land contracts at that point that we needed the servicing license, and then also if someone had a balloon payment due to us, this is hard, you have to put yourself in these days, but the highest rate a non-licensed lender could charge was 11%. And actually the market rate was higher than that in some cases at that point.
Right?
So if you had a license, you could charge more than that. Now, the market changed shortly after that. By the mid to late 90s, prevailing interest rates, they were still a lot higher. First loan I got on my house was 8%, and I was happy to get it. So it's hard to believe that that was a good rate. That was a conforming Fannie Mae rate.
Yeah, 8%. What's wrecking Greece, by the way? If you're wondering about like that 7.5%.
Exactly.
Take the whole
country.
I
think I had 7.25% on a condo I bought before we bought our house, and now I'm like a little over 3 or something. But so you have to look at what the going rate was. But and so in '90 we got our mortgage license, and we figured, we had the license, what could we do with it? So we sort of had 2 choices. One was to compete with the big boys, which would be to hire a bunch of loan officers and, and do a lot of volume and then sell those loans on the secondary market. And it would be a high volume, low margin business. The other choice, which is, probably me being sort of a perfectionist, I was more comfortable with, was, just doing more high margin lending, but lower volume, getting to know our customers, loaning, in maybe market space that was ignored by some of the other lenders, things that made common sense, but yet just didn't fit the square peg in the square hole. So that was, so we grew the business, we're buying the IOUs or land contracts,
Like
and then
niche lending.
and then we also started doing niche lending.
That
Yeah,
made sense.
Yeah,
Is the emphasis still on security as well?
well,
or-
both. I mean, we always figured that we didn't want to do what others would call a loan to own. Part of it was sort of an ethical choice that we figured if we want to buy property, we'll just buy property.
That's a good point.
We're not
Yeah.
looking to put people into loans that they can't afford and end up owning it.
That's actually, hold on, let's stop. That's a
Okay.
great point. You just, for whatever reason, that just, because I was thinking, so going back to this deal that I gave you, this hypothetical, not so hypothetical deal, it appealed to me right away, the security and how you could lose, but what you just said right now just like slapped me in the head like with a frying pan. Like, I could just go out and buy it. Why do I need to buy a note to potentially maybe someday own it? That's a really good point, because it would be just a lot easier to go out and purchase the real estate, right, and do whatever you wanted with it. You wouldn't have to buy a problem and wait.
Well, yeah, and then our goal again, similar to when I was talking to people making calls, is we have money to invest that my dad earned, from dentistry and then selling his practice, and then fortunately
So real
done
money,
okay.
not this 2000s money. We're talking real dollars.
Well, and so our goal was to invest that, and and to have a return. So and we wanted the loans to perform. We wanted to find a way. It sounds somewhat altruistic, but I think it was and is. I mean, we want to help, but there's a mutual help. I mean, we would get a return on our investment. A person that maybe didn't meet the square peg and square hole, would be helped as well. I can give you a couple examples. One, as an investor similar to yourself looking to buy property, but time was of the essence, or the deal would be bought by someone else. Happened to be a lakefront property, and person had great credit, but because the land value exceeded the house value, it didn't meet the secondary market standards. It was quirk in the appraisal. And why is that? Well, the area where the property was, they used to be old cottages, and then people are tearing down these old cottages and building these big houses. Part of it's because there's now sewer and water, but also population shift. So this person had that, wanted to buy this property. He could have walked in the bank and gotten a loan on a home in a subdivision, and everything was perfect except for
Didn't have the time.
he didn't have, the deal would have been gone. And then also is that the appraisal said land value exceeds the structure value, and so we did we're able to help in that situation. And it was a good deal.
There's a big difference between selling medicine and selling drugs, right? Both are still selling, but yeah, you don't want to sell drugs.
Yeah.
You want to sell medicine if you can help somebody, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that analogy before, so but it's a good one. And then
Lots of ways to make money. You want to feel good about how you make
exactly.
money, right?
Yeah, you want to sleep at night. And then another situation. It was I'm trying to think. It was early 2000s. A business owner contacted me. She owned a junkyard or salvage yard. She didn't want to borrow on that property, and I don't think we could have because of the environmental due diligence required.
Yeah.
But she owned a home that she had fallen behind on property taxes on. It was otherwise free and clear. And when she told, I asked, well, how did that happen? She said, well, my business wasn't profitable the last couple of years because I had to meet new standards of the EPA and Michigan environmental, I think it was DEQ or DNR at the time. To meet those standards to stay in business, she had to invest more or clean up or put up fencing or whatever it was. And so she was robbing Peter to pay Paul, money that would have gone to taxes. So she had equity. At the time, there was, again, I don't want to lose my license and we want to do things the right way. So I said, there's a regulation that says a lender cannot engage in a pattern or practice of making loans without regard to a borrower's repayment ability. I remember that. And I said, so I said, I need to ask you, I said, how are you going to repay me? And she had a shoebox full of salvage auto titles and an Excel spreadsheet of what every part was worth on those vehicles down to the crushed metal.
Wow.
I said, okay, so you've got free and clear inventory. That's how you're going to pay. As you're not going to fire sale it all today, but as you sell it, that's how you're going to pay. I said, I get it. And you know, but then in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, you know, we have a license. We get examined whenever they feel like examining us, but we knock on wood, have never had a violation. And you know, so how am I going to feel if an examiner comes in and they pull files randomly to audit and for compliance and, you know, make sure your computer programs do the math right?
Let's go back to the original point where you were pulling off the dot matrix side of the attention to detail, right? And
so exactly. So I'm thinking, okay, well, how am I, you know, let's say this examiner, and, you know, I'm embellishing here, but, you know, but let's say it's like you're, you know, someone who first day on the job and they graduated with a major in social work and a minor in communism, and they, you know, and they come into your office with, and they want to, you know, get promoted, and they pull this file, you know, is this, you know, how am I going to feel about making this loan then? And I thought about it and I said, okay, well, the regulation at the time, first of all, I felt it was a good loan. I mean, the person, you know, had a going business, had free and clear inventory in which to pay. You know, they had a long history in that business, knew what they were doing, and, you know, and I felt that it was compliant. I also knew that the words pattern or practice were in that regulation, and so if the examiner said, you know, I think you've, you know, I don't think they had a repayment ability, first of all, I'd say, well, they do, free and clear inventory. And I think I sent the borrower to Kinko's to make copies because I would have run out of toner making copies of all of them.
I'm amazed at their organization. That would say a lot about somebody too, right?
Yeah, so I think that helped. But in any event, you know, I felt that we could defend it. But then I also, you know, let's say if the examiner said, you know, I've talked to my supervisor and he or she also feels the same way, I'd say, well, you know, you can check every other file. We certainly don't have a pattern or practice of determining repayment ability based on, you know, inventory. Usually it's W-2s and, you know, 1040s and, you know, more conventional underwriting standards. But in this case, you know, we felt it was something that made sense. But, you know, we're not going to, you know, we don't have a pattern or practice. You could check every other file. So I didn't think there was a danger of them taking my license off the wall or us, you know, having our name in the paper, you know, that we were bad actors or anything. So, you know, so I think that was a good loan decision. Now, fast forward about 4 or 5 years, the Federal Reserve, who was in charge of that regulation, took the words pattern or practice out of the regulation. So if it had been 4 or 5 years later, I probably wouldn't have taken a chance, that, you know, because there was risk that, you know, if an examiner disagreed, you know, my license was on the line. And again, that risk-reward...
with your boot on the throat of the man.
You know, but the risk-reward dynamic would have been different. Now, there's a little more to this story, too, because this person, you know, owned her business and did well, never, you know, defaulted or anything. And in the early 2000s, probably within a year or 2 years after we made that loan to her, in Michigan, there was a proposal put forth by the legislature to pass a law that was similar to what Dodd Frank ended up being on a federal level. And while some of the consumer groups felt that that law should be passed, they were, you know, busing some people to Lansing to protest and testify that, you know, that they thought it was a good idea. My customer came with me to Lansing, and she testified how this quote-unquote subprime loan helped her. It was a lifeline when, you know, that existed, and you know, it really, when you talk about fulfilling, and you know, I'm not trying to, you know, generate tears or anything, but it really, you know, we did feel good, you know, helping that person get from point A to point B, so much that she felt that it was a good deed to come to Lansing, taking time out of her work day and coming, you know, meeting me at 7 a.m., driving together there for her to testify before the Senate Banking Committee that, you know, this restrictive law shouldn't be passed. And that's ultimately the way they voted in Michigan.
That's amazing. That's a great story. Yeah, no, free market economist here. So what two people freely decide to do, That's amazing.
Well,
and that's a good point. I would like to emphasize that for people listening. Think about what you're doing and how it would look, especially in the current climate. And we're definitely going to get this way towards the latter half of this podcast about the current, we'll call it atmosphere, regulatory atmosphere, the direction we're heading. I might almost say European style regulation. Is what would it look like to someone from the outside looking in to what you're doing? I think you brought up a great point there is, wow. And she felt so strongly about it, she actually went with you to Lansing to protest against these commie bastards.
Well, restrictive bill, yeah.
I'll
translate, okay.
These people who think they know what everybody else should do just because it's bad for them.
Well, I think, you know, I'm going to be a little more diplomatic, and it's that, you know, there certainly were some abuses, and I think there's no doubt that our business is the baby thrown out with the bathwater. And I think the economy actually, you know, got rid of some of those bad actors. They were making not only, you know, I think they broke the laws that existed at that time.
Didn't need new laws.
They probably didn't need new laws. And also I think they were, you know, they weren't good underwriting, and you know, so they went out of business. And unfortunately, you know, when some of the new laws, and the pendulum tends to swing, and it probably, you know, was too loose, some would argue, that allowed some of these bad actors to take advantage of, you know, of the old regulatory system, and now it's come back, you know, probably too far that, you know, deserving borrowers like the lady I described, we couldn't make that loan today legally.
No,
I could talk to 10 attorneys, and I've talked to a number of one, and you know, it's like going through one of these high-powered mazes where you run into a dead end everywhere. So we actually exited making consumer loans, as you know, but the audience doesn't. You know, 2010, 2011, when we saw this coming, you know, because you know we couldn't. We talked to experts, attorneys, and is there a way to navigate this new regulatory maze, so to speak? They didn't have, you know, clear navigation signals for us, and you know, I remember walking out of one of those meetings with you know, compliance attorney, and we also had a transactional attorney in the room, and I figured it'd be entertaining to watch them debate. They ended up both agreeing, even on what I thought might be a bulletproof, you know, compliant deal, and they said it's too risky and you don't want to be a test case. So at that point we put up the white flag.
Yeah, surrender.
And I called my dad after, and you know, he said, how did it go? And I said, well, not too well. He said, well, what happened? You know, and what did this guy say? What did that guy say? And did you talk about this example that, you know, I essentially made up as what I thought might work? And you know, I said, I mentioned that, and they both agreed. And you know, I said, it's really too bad because, you know, there's more demand than ever for this type of product, and there's really no competition. And my dad, without me just missing a beat, says, you know, if it ain't legal, we ain't doing it. I mean, it essentially, you know, it's like heroin, and you know, if we're not, you know, there's demand for heroin too, but if it ain't legal, we're not selling it.
Well, that's always my argument. I don't want to get off topic too much, but my argument against compliance is compliance pushes the good usually pushes the good actors out, not the bad.
Well,
the ones who are concerned about following the law, the ones who are concerned about how it looks, are concerned about their investors and their investments and their families. They look at compliance and they consider compliance, and if it's muddied or difficult or uncertain, they were probably the ones who were never going to make that kind of loan anyway, or significantly less likely to originate a loan like that, and they get kind of pushed out. And the bad actors, whom we know plenty, I've had experience with them personally, tend not to care so much about compliance.
Yeah, I mean, they were breaking the old laws, and you know, they may break the new ones. I mean, the biggest example, and I think, you know, I think I brought this up at the first presentation I did before RDI, you know, was looking back towards prohibition, as you had a product that was legal one day, and then, you know, due to, you know, federal and state laws, became illegals. And if you look at, for the old-time Detroiters in the area, there was the Stroh Brewery. And a German family immigrated to the United States, started a brewery, probably been in existence, 60, 70 years by the, early 1900s. Had a big brewery in Detroit. And then the next, they saw coming, stroke of a pen that, that product you're selling. So what did they do? They didn't necessarily closed up shop. They changed their name to Stroke Products, and they sold items including ice cream. And the ice cream actually was still around when I was in high school, and there might be one or two.
They're still around.
Yeah, they're still around.
I don't know if they sold the name, but they're still around.
Okay, so I mean, Stroh's Ice Cream, that's where that came from. And then, of course, when
that's
they changed
amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's where that ice cream came from.
But if you were in Detroit or Chicago or anywhere during the Prohibition period, you could still buy beer, but who did you buy it from? Well,
Gangsters.
Al Capone and gangsters.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's the same thing here. I mean, it wasn't a hard choice for us. We talked to the lawyers. Is there a way, to still make loans to consumers? And no. Okay. Well, we'll find something else to do. We did always, about maybe 20 to 30% of our market was making loans to landlords and real estate investors. So now if we're walking away from 2/3 to 80% of our market, we've got to concentrate on what we can do, or we got to learn how to make ice cream or do something like that, or I got to wait for AT&T to call some days.
That's a good attitude. So for anybody listening, this is, I think in the future, and I'm not trying to be too pessimistic, but I think Allan has convinced me, certainly, that as much as I don't like compliance, it is smart, and he's always trying to foster an atmosphere of compliance, but also looking forward into the future. We are very likely for some period of time to probably have to comply more rather than less. And I just want to point out that I think it's a good attitude. As bad as it might be for somebody with a stroke of a pen to disable or destroy a percentage or all of your business, just start something else. Do something different. Don't be that. Don't think you're going to dance around the edges or anything like that. I think that would be bad attitude. So, but anyway, so here we are, 1989, January. You're on your father's payroll. You're dating your wife. You got married in 1984. At what point did you know? 94. 94?
Yeah, 89.
That's right. Sorry.
Okay,
My bad. So
that's okay.
89. You got married in 94. At what point did you know this is like, okay, I just love this. I'm going to make a run at it. I'm going to make a go at it. I squandered my 20s. I was drinking beer, doing drugs, and all that other stuff. Nothing good. Where along in that process did you make that or did you have I don't know if it came to you or you made a decision or you said I'm going to try this for a certain number of years? What did that look like?
Well, I didn't, it was what I was doing, and most days I liked it. And I was, earning a decent living, building some savings. I was living fairly frugally, and it's one of the reasons I didn't get married yet. But I think, at that point I liked it. I didn't have my eyes looking at other things. There were certainly some days that were more challenging than others. I remember getting a letter for our license renewal for the mortgage license, and our mortgage, now it's much higher than this, but I think it went up one year from $300 to $600. And the Michigan Mortgage Brokers Association was very young at the time, and we had joined it. And I called the president of the association, who was had a mortgage company in East Lansing. He said, he called the state, and he said, well, they checked with the mortgage bankers, but they didn't even know that the mortgage brokers existed. And, and the mortgage bankers were mainly bigger companies, and they said they didn't mind if it doubled. So at that point, I did make a decision that I didn't have any input on that. And I thought if something like that ever happened again, I might have even said over my dead body or something like that. I was younger.
That's right.
And so at that point, I think because I made that call to the president of the association, and I went to a meeting, And I remember, you know, one of the deputy commissioners who is now a friend of mine, he's retired from the state, he's now working in government affairs, but, you know, at the time, I mean, he's speaking there, I think, you know, I'm a kid in the business a couple years, it's like the governor speaking or the president, I mean, you know, looking up at the stage, and, but then, you know, they asked me to serve on the board, and, you know, then I met our lobbyist for the association, and, you know, I had read the license law and, you know, would have some comments, and I got involved, and not only did I have a passion for our own business, I developed a passion for the industry as a whole. Now, part of it, and my dad may say now I went a little overboard on that, if you look at, you know, like the bio he read, but I think part of it is working in a small family business. You know, the difference between that and maybe taking that AT&T job is that, you know, I don't really have a work social life, or, you know, other than customers, maybe some title people, or going to meetings now with, you know, RDI. But I think that association, you know, gave me some camaraderie, and it was fulfilling to, you know, to serve, and you know, so I enjoyed that. So I think if anything, the passion, you know, grew over the years rather than, you know, was I looking at other things.
So basically, the government decided to double your annual fee, and Mr. Allan Daniels was like, oh, hells no. Made a call, joined, ended up on the board, and now you literally have an alphabet behind your name.
Yeah.
When it comes to compliance and organizations and everything that you've done. So you're that guy now. You're that guy up there you were looking at.
Yeah, I've gotten involved.
Hold on, let me read this. So, National Association of Realtors, Conventional Financing and Policy Committee and Public Policy Coordinating Committee, Michigan Association of Realtors, 2013-2014 Board Member Director, 2014-2015 Public Policy Committee Member, North Oakland County Board of Realtors, Board Member Director, National Association of Mortgage Brokers, served as treasurer. I mean, I could just keep going.
I think the biggest one, you know, as compared to the, you know,
State of Michigan Mortgage Industry Advisory Board Chairman.
Yeah.
2010 to 2015 Government Affairs Liaison, 2015-2016. Yeah.
Okay, and so I think, you know, where the circle goes with that, and it, you know, and I would have never predicted it, is that, you know, I was the chair of the Mortgage Industry Advisory Board. Well, what that board is we make recommendations to what used to be called the commissioner, but the commissioner is the person back in 1991 that, you know, talked to some senators and representatives and said, our department needs more money. How about we raise the licensing fee? So now I'm on the board. I actually chaired that board that works hand in hand with the regulator. And you know, they have a lot more power. We're an advisory board, but again, we do serve in that liaison role to have that communication. And you know, if they are bringing up an issue that you know, maybe there's some bad actors in the industry and they need, you know, some investigators or examiners, and we need, you know, how are we going to get the appropriations or, you know, the money to pay these salaries? You know, okay, well, can the industry, you know, take a hit on the license fees, or is there another way, or, you know, is there some efficiency? And that's just, you know, one item.
And you decided you wanted to be an integral part of that.
Yeah,
you wanted to say
at a young age, I got involved. I had no idea that this advisory board would ever, you know, that they'd ever revise. I mean, this took an act of revising the law to create this board, and then, you know, I mean, obviously I was involved enough. But then they, you know, my name was put forward, and then, you know, the commissioner, you know, appointed me, as well as there's a total of 7 on that board. For the first 2 years of the board, someone that's family has been in the industry a very long time was the chairperson. And then I guess, you know, he decided at the end of 2 years he didn't want to chair that board anymore, and he recommended me to chair the board. And the board agreed and voted me chairman for the next 5 years. And then because I'll be term limited on the board, it's my 8th year. You have 2 consecutive 4-year terms.
Term limits, just
yeah,
like
yeah. So I didn't. I thought it would be better for transition if someone else chaired the board, and then I could help with that transition before I leave the board next May. But I mean, it wasn't, you know, any sort of plan, and it is, I mean, we do get mileage reimbursement when we go to meetings in Lansing, but this is a non-paid board, but it is something where it started with, you know, I got a bill that was more than last year, and, you know, I wanted to get involved, and, you know, then, you know, who would guess that a few years later, I'm in Lansing testifying before the Senate Banking Committee. You know, I've got a video of one of them that I showed on Mother's Day to my family one year. I think it's VHS, so it's going to be tough to show that again. But, you know, I mean, things I never thought I would do. And now, has it helped my net worth? I don't know if it has or not, but I feel I've done, you know, most of the time the right thing. You know, I've made mistakes, you know, like anyone in business, and I have gone through a yellow light. You know, I've never had a speeding ticket though.
Why does that not surprise me, Mr. Daniels? Why does that not surprise me at all? That's a good thing though. I'm not making fun of you. We should all be so careful, right? So 1984, you're in it, you like it, you got the alphabet, you're growing the business, you went and got a license to do servicing and origination of loans, right?
That was in '90, yeah.
And you're 90, so you're finding niches where there's lots of value and security, where you can feel good and you feel like if anybody was coming back and looking through that you'd, at least by the laws of the time,
yeah, well, and
you would feel good
yeah,
about it.
I mean, and we did always look at repayment ability, and you know, and because and then one of the other things where there were other lenders, you know, we had a license, we could originate, and we still have a license, we could originate any type of mortgage. But what we focused on was loaning our own funds and, you know, private money space that was generally, you know, a tick or two or three, sometimes higher than conventional rates. But the deals made common sense, and our default rate was, you know, lower than Fannie Mae. Why? You know, we met our borrowers face to face. We, you know, would design a mortgage product that fit their needs, that the payment was affordable for them, you know, and you know, essentially, if it didn't look like it was going to get them from point A to point B, you know, they wouldn't call back. But, you know, so it was very, you know, sort of, you know, custom fit type thing.
You meant Fannie Mae before Bill Clinton got it.
Okay. So in any event, but we could have, and we actually had, my dad and I had a discussion, you know, should we also offer conventional mortgages, you know, but we felt that, you know, and again, I'll say sort of an ethical consideration, we didn't feel very good if we, you know, if someone said, well, you know, if somebody asked me what my rate was, and if it was a higher rate, and they said, oh, well, I don't want to pay that much, and they said, oh, well, we also offer conventional loans, how could I do that?
Yeah.
You know, and now it's actually, I mean, it would be called steering towards a higher price loan. So I'm, you know, the regulation caught up with what we had decided ethically was, you know, at least on our, you know, was ethically wrong to offer both prime and subprime. We felt, you know, this is what we offer, but, you know, the first question we would ask someone is, are you able to qualify conventionally? And if the answer was yes, well, you know, we don't offer, you know, but if the answer was no or yeah, but, I'd say, well, what's the reason? They'd say, well, yes, I do qualify, but the deal's going to be gone in 10 days and it's going to take them 6 weeks to close. Okay, well, let's talk more about that. You know, because for them, maybe the value wasn't price, or they were getting such a good deal on the property that even if they paid more for the financing, it was still an overall good deal. And again, that, you know, that was that house that was, the land value exceeded the structure value.
Were you really needed, basically?
Yeah.
And if you were, it might make sense if they could repay.
Yeah, so, you know, and now I do, one of the things I also do now, and I do, you know, I get paid for it, it's not enough to retire on, but I teach mortgage and real estate continuing education. Now the mortgage class each year, a mortgage loan originator needs 8 hours of continuing ed. So that's a long day. But, and there's part of the component, and this is part of a federal requirement, is that you have to teach ethics. And some of it, you know, is part of law, but some of it...
Teaching ethics to realtors?
Well, this is mortgage loan originators, which you could probably make the same comment, you know, years ago. But actually the populace of loan originators has been really scrubbed clean. I mean, under, you know, a law called the SAFE Act, which also was the first instance of seller financing regulation on a federal level that we saw. there's a criminal background check, fingerprinting, criminal background check, education, testing, so you're not getting someone that, maybe was, working, buying and selling used cars one day that's now, in the mortgage world the next. I mean, they have to, be able to pass all these tests and also the criminal background check now. So I think that populace is much more squeaky clean than it used to be. I mean, there's no doubt. But in teaching ethics, I remember a discussion I heard years ago, and someone says, how do you teach ethics? Well, I mean, there are some common denominators between all cultures and faiths and, and even the non-believers. Do unto others is universal. How would you, even as a kid growing up, how would you feel if I did that to you?
If I got up lots of good points like that.
So I think that something, and then also, like I thought about, when making that loan, I knew what the regulation was, but also, if I'm examined, how am I going to defend that, and was it the right decision? And obviously I was proven right. I mean, she's paid off now, but this was a good loan to make, and she proved it by making the payments. But also you have to look at, and different people may have a different sensitivity level to this, or thicker skin might be a way of putting that. And Mike Wallace, I think, may not be around anymore, but if 60 Minutes walked into your office and put a microphone in your face and asked you about that specific file, how are you going to feel talking about it?
This is something I worry about all the time, actually. I do.
Well,
I worry about what we do, how it looks, how it's perceived. I've actually changed a lot of my language, especially of late, even in banter, because I worry about these things. I sometimes wonder that we're being drawn as these evil, almost like corporate welfare bankers, like just coming by, and before you go home, you got to slide off, a certain percentage of the food from your family into their mouth, and then you get to eat what's left over, and you kind of looked at like that, instead of how you put it, where these things actually can hurt the economy, where there is a niche, and a law didn't consider it. This does have an impact on the economy. It does have an impact on people's life. That's why that was so powerful that she actually went with you to Lansing to back to, and that's proof that these things matter when you're thinking about it. But you're putting you have a plan when you do these things. Like, you're not just saying, hey, my plan today is make money. You're trying to make money, but am I compliant?
Well,
do they need my loan? Can they repay it? How would I feel if somebody came through and flipped through this file? Like, you're thinking about this all the time. It's just part of life.
Well, yeah, it becomes sort of who you are. I mean, because you live these sort of regulations. These are the rules of the game, and one of the nicest compliments I ever heard was from a compliance professional who has taught and owned a school on the mortgage side and audits files of big banks and does that. And someone had contacted her to get a reference about me or something, and she said, Allan does hard money and he does it the right way. And then I got an email from this person, if I don't want to name the name right now, but if you were described this way by this person, I know what you have to be to even, have her say anything nice about it. But she doesn't say anything nice about anybody unless they deserve it.
Well, as hard as I am on realtors, and where there aren't many mortgage brokers anymore and all that, but we all know real estate investors, pretty much pawn scum too. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but I've had RDI for a long time. I've met thousands of people, and I assume it's like this in most industries. I don't know, maybe it's not. We do seem to attract a fair amount of riffraff, or I'm not sure why. Maybe, I don't want to speculate, but when I'm making fun of everyone else, I guess what I'm saying is I understand the company I keep, and I try and keep better company, but that doesn't mean that a lot of them aren't bad, and they do.
Well, I think what people need to realize that some of the gurus selling the CDs or on YouTube or whichever, they make it sound a lot easier than it is. They may tell you, a license isn't required when you actually read your state laws. It may be required. And so I think, if people don't know any better, ignorance isn't a defense, but, they start going out and start shooting before they aim. So I think, if there's a lesson, it would be to do a little research. And, even though when I started, it was, helping, I was prospecting, buying land contracts, for my dad. I had taken the 40-hour real estate class, so it did tell me, some ground rules. I passed the test. There were some basics that I think, would be wise, even if you're not gonna go work for, the yellow coats or the red coats or the green or whatever, they don't have those same thing anymore, but, one of the big franchises, the Blue Circle, or, that might, it's not a waste of time to take that class, because you're gonna get some basic knowledge that, first of all, you're gonna find it useful in your investing career, things about, different types of deeds and ownership and leasehold and title work and appraisals, because you're going to be selling property, you're going to be dealing with real estate agents. You want to know, and then things like usury, things like contract law. I mean, these are things that I didn't learn in high school or undergrad. I learned it in a 40-hour real estate class. Some of the basics that maybe should have been taught in econ or something like that. I learned, macro, micro, graphing, what's a contract? What's the statute of frauds? What's this register of deeds all about? What's priority of liens? And that, they teach you in that. And it's, you may say, oh, well, that sounds, that's what everybody else is doing. Well, there's a reason. It tells you the rules of the road. It's like getting a driver's license. So I'm a proponent. You may find that your business plan would exempt you from that, but at least you're going to find out what the exemptions are, because that's going to. What I worry about, and we see this overreaction with the pendulum, that it might have been too loose before, and then people were abusing it, and then what concerns me, and it's related to that pendulum swinging, too loose to too tight, is that if you have either bad actors where it's a character situation or bad actions from people that are not knowledgeable, so you got me bad actors and bad actions. Now both of them are creating bad actions and bad results.
I was one of those.
Then you're going to have an overreaction on the real estate investment side.
Yeah.
And so that's,
which I think we're seeing.
Yeah, I think we are. Or we will be. And, I think in Ohio you're already seeing it, on the wholesaling interpretations and so forth. And so I think what worries me is that, I've seen it and lived through it on the mortgage side. And I think, real estate is a great thing, but I think people have to respect the existing rules, because if they're not respecting it, then you're going to see an overreaction, because politicians do not get reelected based on enforcement of existing laws. They're not going to say we're going to do a better job of giving the regulators money to enforce the law. No, they're going to say you need to vote for me, because if elected, I'm going to pass a new law against these bad guys, or I just voted for a new law, or I just introduced a bill, because that's where the photo opportunity comes. And I'm not saying they're bad people. I mean, they have a job to do, and if you want to do good things in government, the first thing you have to do is win a popularity contest.
Yeah.
And if you remember high school or middle school or whatever, winning a popularity contest is tough. I mean, because to be popular doesn't always mean you're qualified. So, people have to do things to get elected to be able to do good things. Now, again, you've got, maybe some people that are better than others and in that profession too, but that's, our system has some flaws. I think it was my dad quoted a story he heard once, and it might have been about our court system, but it was, it's slightly better than dueling.
Having been a part of the court system.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, you say, America is this and it used to be that, or it could be this and it is that. I mean, they're really, as flawed as it is, at least we can have a conversation about it without being jailed or shot. So there really isn't anywhere else I'd rather be, and at least we do have the opportunity to change things. Now, having been successful in changing things and unsuccessful in changing things too, I realize that even if I disagree with a law, I'm not going to break it. I might try as hard as I can to change it in some instances, or in some cases I just realize it's going to be beating my head up against the wall.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I've been more active locally on in state associations is because when I did things in Washington, it was more frustrating. It was a lot easier to have an impact in Lansing than it is in DC.
Yeah, I imagine dealing with anything in the feds is just the extra layers of difficult, and
Yeah.
we got 50 different states, 50 different laws too, and
Yeah, so
they can't possibly know everything when they're doing
yeah,
this stuff.
so to transition, and I know you have other things you wanted to bring up before the next battery dies, but I think that's the reason. One, I think it's going to be helpful for an individual to get licensed, or at least have that pre-license education to know the rules of the game, so they don't break them, because they're breaking the rules of the game is going to have an impact not only on them, but the whole industry, and all of our futures and our children's futures riding on that. It's pretty deep for a podcast.
It is. No, actually, we're going to come back to this a little bit more, but I want to fast forward. So you're married, finally, 94, kids, September 11th, 2001. Everything changes. Economy crashes. Couple planes, terrorists, all that, and then we enter 2002 to 2008. So this is the big boom, and unfortunately this is when I came in at the tail end. Also, I lived all over the world. My father was in the military. I joined the military out of high school. I actually had no idea what economy actually was. That's one of the big problems about growing up as a dependent military family, living all over the world, it's an artificial economy. You get paid every 2 weeks. No matter where you go, there's a little America. You go, we lived on the economy wherever we were at. But what I'm saying is I had no idea what an economy was, what government regulation could have an effect on the economy. I'm one of the guys who believed the Fed chairman and Bernanke and all those guys, and they say, no, it's fine, 1 month before the crash. So we are 2002 to 2008. You're definitely doing this now. You're married, you got kids, you're growing the business, you're originating loans now. What does 2002 to 2008 look like for you and your company?
Well, I think the real estate market was good. Things were appreciating. We still had challenges because there was a lot of competition, and there were pressures if we wanted to, I'll use the term grow our portfolio, in number of loans outstanding and amount of receivables, but we were, because it was our own money, not Wall Street money.
Yeah.
We had 100% skin in the game, and we always asked ourselves, so what happens, if something changes? And we stayed fairly conservative. The other is we always were focused on, trying to, create, do something that was right, or is right. And, so a lot of times we found that our competitors didn't always feel the same way. They might be more short-term oriented, because their goal was to write a loan and then sell it off. So an example, maybe the best way is to share a story or an anecdote.
Yes, this is great.
I mean, I had a woman that had contacted me. She actually rented her primary residence, but she had inherited a home up in northern Michigan in Interlochen, which is where there's a famous musical school up there. And this home, I think, was roughly worth $100,000, and she wanted some money to pay. I think there were some back taxes and to do some improvements on it. And we I think made a loan to her of $20,000, or a relatively small amount, low loan to value. And but the reason for that was twofold. It allowed her to meet her needs. But also with a bigger loan comes a bigger payment, and with a not huge income, I think she was obviously employed, but she didn't have a big income, and some of that she needed for rent. we had concerns based on, and I can't recall the debt to income ratio, but, I mean, you can look at.
Yeah, how are you gonna pay this lady?
Yeah, how are you gonna pay? It certainly couldn't be more than what she's making.
You cared about her ability to repay.
Yeah, exactly. And both, because, again, if we want to end up with property in Interlochen, I'll buy the place next door.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't our goal. Our goal was to, grow our portfolio by, another $20,000 or whatever, and, and have payments coming in each month that were not, a month late or 2 months late, And so I got a call from her not long after the documents would have been recorded at the Register of Deeds, became public record, that she said, I think I'll use the name because they're no longer around, that AmeriQuest just called her and said that she's wasting her equity. And I said, well, what? I said, well, you're not locked in, and I don't think you even have a prepayment penalty. I said, what are they offering? Well, they're going to loan me $125,000. And I said, well, that's 125% of the value. Well, they're saying that, their appraiser can get it appraised for 150, and it's, and it's really worth that. And I said, okay, well, I said, we just had someone look at it, and, this is what it is, but maybe, maybe just put an addition on it. I mean, I'm pretty sure I knew what was going on. But I, again, and I said, well, and also they're offering a lower rate. Well, what's their rate? It's this. I said, well, are you sure it's not adjustable? Well, they told me it was fixed. I said, yeah, but they probably said fixed, and then, maybe on the documents it's fixed the first few years. And I said, I'm not saying anybody double talked. I haven't seen the papers, but I said, here's where you might want to find out whether it's like a teaser rate that's fixed. I mean, I'm trying to, it's a lost cause, because what this woman is
free
saying,
money.
Exactly. That's what, so lo and behold, we get a request for a payoff letter. We, send the payoff letter to the title company, and we get a check. So a lot, this is, while this is a, an example that comes to mind, what we call that is runoff. You make a loan, and then, it pays off. Or even something that you made a couple years ago, which was designed to be maybe a 2-year loan until the person had more time on the job and could qualify conventionally. Or you made a loan to an investor that they were going to fix up the home and sell. I mean, that was their whole business plan. So you've got some of your portfolio is constantly running off. The bigger the portfolio gets, the more naturally is running off. And then you've got this enhanced runoff because of the aggressive telemarketing from the bigger subprime players. And, so it was very difficult to grow. There were a lot of, but there was more and more equity and more people wanting. I mean, so there were deals, we were able to do deals, but there were challenges in those times too. It wasn't utopia. Now, so I'll finish that story, unless you want to go something else chronologically, but I'll tell you how this one finished up. So sure enough, we know what happens after 2000, 2007, 2008, is that the bottom fell out. So I think I got a call from the same woman, that, she wasn't able to meet her obligations and what would happen. And I said, well, this will, I said, you can either sell it if you've got equity, you can try to see if someone will refinance. Would you do it? I said, well, I don't think you can afford the payment. You'd be welcome to apply, first thing I said.
Yeah.
But what do you owe now? Well, she didn't make her payment, she owes even more. And, I said, well, what's it worth? There wasn't a lot of equity, the payments would have been really high, so I don't think she even applied. So I didn't really know what happened. And then a couple years later, I got a call from her, and she was sort of upset. She says, my redemption period just ended, I'm gonna lose, the place, and it's all because of these big bad mortgage companies and banks. And I said, well, what happened? I said, AmeriQuest? Oh, no, that was 3 loans ago. Now I owe GMAC. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, what do you owe now? Well, the redemption is this. I said, what's the place worth? Well, it's come back a little bit in value, but it's not worth that much. Aren't they terrible? And I said, well, I said, maybe you'll feel better if you look at it from a different perspective. I said,
you feel like you're a victim. And I said, there maybe, if you just look at it from another perspective, you won't feel like you were victimized. And I said to her, if you would have sold the property at the top of the market, depending on your situation, you might have had to pay capital gains, maybe not, but you would have had the same amount of money, less whatever commission, but you wouldn't have the use of the property. I said, in your, situation, you got all the money, you got to use the property until like 2 weeks from now, and you didn't have to pay any taxes on it. So maybe if you just looked at it that you won, maybe you'll sleep a little better. I said, that's just, another way of looking at it. Oh, geez, thank you so much for explaining it to me that way. So
you explained it very nicely.
Yeah,
too,
well, yeah. I mean, now a more cynical person sitting across from me could say that. I mean, there certainly was a lack of borrower responsibility. But
Cry me a river, lady.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you've got two instances. What gets a lot of play is that these subprime companies that are out of business, and it certainly would be true if you say that there was greed involved.
Absolutely.
But I think on the borrower side there was the same trait of greed involved, is that they wanted the money. Many of them were, if there were instances of mortgage fraud, it was probably some of the, I would say there's an argument to be that it was mutual. If the income that she told me, that we computed a payment with, and what was told to, maybe AmeriQuest and GMAC to qualify for this big loan later. I mean, I know from talking to this lady, she wasn't dumb. She may not have had a PhD from, Wharton, but I mean, she had a lot of street smarts, and she knew money. She knew, and she knew when to play not so smart. I mean, dumb like a fox. So I think in this case, I mean, I think in the beginning, she respected me for, doing a loan that she could afford. But she was disappointed. She wanted more money, and she found a place that would give her more money, and then she learned how to do it the next time. But then, she thought playing the card of a victim would be fine. And I think, at the end of the day, she probably would have preferred to be able to keep it, because you hear about other people where they write things off and the bank walks away. But I think I felt sort of good that she still trusted me for an opinion. And at the end of the day, if that helped her sleep better, great. But I think you have to look at some consumer and borrower responsibility too.
Absolutely. Especially since she had that conversation with you, she can't pretend like she didn't know, and you point all that out to her. So somehow you just basically didn't take the bait at all, 2002 to 2008.
Well,
you've been in the market long enough. You knew.
We were still impacted. I mean, we felt pressure to increase, loan to value, based on what competitors were doing. We, for the most part, dug in our heels because, things just didn't make business sense. I mean, we had boots on the ground and we could see. But particularly on smaller loans, on lower value properties, where you look at, if somebody does default, and, we always common sense perspective. Let's say, like we talked about this deal earlier on the land contract. If somebody owes us, $30,000 and the house is worth $50,000, that's a 60% loan to value. Okay, let's say they fall behind, they lose their job, or they both lose the job, husband and wife. And, and then the house, they couldn't afford the taxes either. So as long as all their brain's working, they're thinking rationally, okay, so they sell the house for $45,000, they pay a commission, they can solve the problem. They'll still walk away with roughly $10,000, pay us off, and then go buy or rent something else. Nobody gets hurt, and then more than likely if things are going up in value, there's even or they keep their jobs. So we always thought, okay, that we wouldn't be impacted because the borrowers will solve the problem themselves. The rare cases that there was when things were good, a case of a default or something where the borrower didn't solve the problem themselves, was when people weren't thinking clearly. Sometimes, in an emotional state, maybe in a divorce where marriage is dissolving, they're not thinking business-wise. It's he won't pay, so she won't pay. I mean, they're spiting each other. And,
that's not good.
Well, or sometimes it's the other thing, right? Somebody, they inherit another house or they win the lotto and they, it's not really, okay, well, I'm just going to move, I'm going to walk away and everything. But it was very rare that if the business side of it made sense that somebody would lose a home. Well, when the market went bad, you had people losing their jobs and you had the market declining much more than anyone would project it. So if, let's say you had a $40,000 house that was now a $20,000 house, or $50,000 in this example I gave you, where maybe we loaned 30 and then that one went down to 25, we're impacted. And then also, an attorney charges the same amount on a $500,000 default action as he would on a $25,000. If the municipality has to cut the grass because no one else is cutting the grass, and bear in mind I don't have permission to go on the property until the whole procedure is done, the municipality is going to charge the same amount or pay the same person overtime to cut it, regardless of the value. So you've got, the balance going up, the value going down. So there were instances we were darn glad that we weren't more aggressive like some of our competitors that went out of business. And one of the reasons we're still here is we were conservative.
Did you do the I told you dance? I might have. I told you.
Well, I mean, there were some, some instances where we were impacted. I mean, and it was, and even like my dad, he mentioned that there would be cycles that he saw through the 70s. Even in the 70s, you had high interest rates, but you didn't have steep value decline. One is because they hadn't spiked up before that. But I think, it was something that, I certainly hadn't seen before, and I'm glad, we survived. But then once the economy, and then the other thing, I had a spinal fusion in 2007. So it was a good time to have it because as I was convalescing, things were in free fall. And, and so it was a good time for us to take a time out because I wasn't working for 4 to 6 weeks. And, it was as things were in free fall and we didn't know where that bottom was going to be. So we stopped originating new loans for a little while. And then when things did stabilize, we went in, at a lower loan to value, with even tighter criteria as far as repayment ability. And then as things started to recover, then we had a huge change in regulation. So the world changed again, but at least we'd seen, a huge change, and it was a little easier to adapt to the change in regulation because we saw, the economic change before it. And just life constantly changes, and as you get older, it's easier to accept. But and it's a lot easier to talk about now because I'm not in the midst of it.
Yeah.
But there's still times that you reminisce and based on the way things were. I'd be able to do a lot of things different that I can't do now. But does that mean I'm gonna circumvent or no? No. I am who I am, and we've got to deal with the rules and the cards that were dealt. So
you're a grizzly veteran too.
I still feel like a kid. Yeah.
We're all gonna live long enough to see a lot of change. And like the quote that I started with, most people would rather die than change by Ayn Rand, is I catch myself there sometimes too. That's something I have to constantly remind myself to let go of. There's nothing wrong with change. Life is change. So you survived 2002, and actually I should, instead of 2008, for those listening, for America it was 2008. For Michigan it was 2007.
Yeah.
It came early. I
early.
remember in June, having just moved here in May, having something like 13, 14 projects going, and literally by August 1st being fucking broke. Just July was the worst month. July 2007 was the worst month of my professional career. I don't know about that. Maybe there's some other worse months. That's right at the very top. It just literally crashed down. So 2007, I should say 2002 to 2007, but 2008 for the rest of the country. And then for those who don't know, in Michigan, Allan was talking about redemption. In Michigan, after a borrower ceases paying and it goes into foreclosure, and after the court comes down on the gavel and says, okay, you've lost your home in Michigan, if it's a mortgage, they have 6 months after the foreclosure to redeem the property. It'd be whatever was owed plus fees and everything else like that. So for those who are listening in Europe, not every state has redemption. I don't think there should be redemption, but Michigan has 6-month redemption for mortgages, 3-month redemption, or I should say 180 days for a mortgage, 90 days for a land contract, correct?
Well, yeah, mortgage is 6 months. They actually use months.
They say 6 months,
And,
okay.
and there are some mortgages, generally it's limited to agricultural properties where it's a year. And that comes back from the old farming days where
Yeah.
they'd be able to harvest their crops. And so again, there is a need for a lawyer. You don't want to do that yourselves because you do have, different redemption periods. And on a land contract, generally it's 90 days. However, it is dependent on the amount of equity. If they've got it more than half paid for, like this one you talked about, in that case, it's 180 days.
Ooh, that's
So,
good to know.
yeah.
I did not know that. So just if you're listening, that's what redemption period
Yeah.
means and all that. So, okay, so let's fast forward to 2015. I met you in, I think it was 2010 or 11.
I think it might have been a little later than that. I think it was 10, well, it might have been 11, and then the reason I know is August 29, 2011 was when the SAFE Act final rule became effective. See how I did?
See? Yeah, that's how you remember.
Yeah, so it was probably
That's hardcore,
it was
man.
probably 2012 when we met, and then I think it was the beginning of 13, the January meeting where I did the presentation at RDI. So it's been almost 4 years now because we're close to 16. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's when we met.
what are you doing in your business now? What are you doing in your business now that works, that you like,
Well, I guess I'll try to pick out 3 things. One of the items is we're still looking for we've identified some niches that might be ignored by others, and one of the spaces, and again you've got to find a need. But one of the spaces is residential landlords that own a number of properties that are otherwise qualified for conventional mortgages, but are sort of cut off by the number of loans that the secondary market investors will allow them. I think right now that number is 10. So let's say you've got someone who's a good credit risk, they manage their properties well, and they can walk into their bank or credit union and get a loan. But once they have, whether it's 10, whether it's 24, whatever, they have borrowed essentially all the cheap money they can borrow. And at that point, if they want to continue to buy rental properties, they have 2 choices. One is to try to find sellers that'll offer seller financing, or the other is to put those rent checks in the bank to build up their savings to be a cash buyer. So what we've done is, we haven't done a great job at identifying all of them, but we have some very good borrowers who are residential landlords that are in that space where they've exhausted all the opportunity to borrow conventionally, but yet they're not big enough to be like I'll use the name Donald Trump. To be able to go into the commercial department of their bank and get a 7-figure loan. So somebody needs, 200,000-300,000 secured by, 4 or 6 rental properties. We can do that to give them money to buy more, or maybe to put, maybe some of their properties need new driveways or roofs. So we'll do loans for business purpose to professional landlords so that they can acquire, maintain, and improve more properties. Now we are, we do verify that, not only don't they live in the properties, but also that it is a business purpose, that they're not using the money to take a trip around the world or to put their kids through Harvard or whatever, because that would be considered personal, family, or household use. So there is still a compliance aspect. The other thing we'll do, and this would be 2 of the 3, is we still do buy land contracts or notes or the IOUs.
Secured IOUs.
Yeah, but those are harder to find. And when we do, there just isn't a whole lot of them being generated. There aren't a whole lot of sellers selling on land contract. And then also there are some new regulations that we can go over later if you want, dealing with land contracts origination.
Yeah.
And so it's harder, or the degree of difficulty has increased to determine whether these land contracts were originated in a compliant manner, meaning, did they follow the law? So for us to determine that, and there's a higher risk, obviously, if they weren't compliant. Yeah, so we are still buying contracts, and and then so the loans to real estate landlords will also loan to investors that are buying, fixing, and selling. You could use the term flip, but I tend to avoid the four-letter F word.
Yeah.
Just because there was a connotation during that growth period that it was fraudulent, because there were some players that used didn't really do the work. They'd just get an appraiser or
A Detroit special too. Well, how many have you seen with that 1-inch brick veneer just on the front of the house?
Well, for the front photo. Yeah.
The roof done on the front of the house.
Yeah. So so there was some fraud going on at that time, but but for people doing things the right way, sometimes they find themselves property rich and cash poor. They may have properties in inventory that they have a couple of choices. One would be to slash the price, because they need cash for another deal, or the other might be they own the property free and clear, is that we could do a loan on that. And so just like the loan to the landlord, where it doesn't fit that square peg and square hole. So we are loaning to landlords and investors. We are buying contracts. And then through the years, we've also occasionally someone, might be a mistake that they call us. Not a mistake that we're the wrong person to call, but they might have misunderstood the ad that says we buy land contracts and say, oh, would you buy my house? Well, I'm not going to spend an hour explaining the difference between a land contract purchase and buying a house. I might say, well, yeah, your house is for sale. What's your situation? And talk to them. And if it's someone that's open to the idea of selling to a non-retail buyer, where they're where maybe they've got inherited the house, they live in another state, or the house it needs a lot of work and they don't have the resources to be able to do that work, or they're we do buy in properties for investment purposes as well.
Okay, I haven't thought about that. Do you guys, so do you have rentals?
We don't have rentals ourselves, so if
flip or wholesale?
Yeah, if something, if somebody calls, we would either work with someone, a licensed builder to renovate, see there's that license word again, to renovate the home, and then maybe we'd retail it, or, perhaps we'd buy it, and then, maybe sell it to a landlord, or someone that has a crew to do the work on that. And again, it's going to be deal by deal, and it's not a huge focus of our business, but it is something. We have some real estate knowledge. We have some capital, and I guess one of the things we don't have is some construction expertise. So we don't. And I don't have a management team for rental management. So, if there's a way that we can use what we do have and find other players in the business that, can use their skills. So like I said, if we buy and then maybe, we'll pay a builder, to fix up for us, and then we'll retail it. Or maybe there's someone that, is a rehabber that, perhaps we bought the property and then we'll sell it to that person that's either going to rent it out or resell it themselves after fixing up to today's standards.
Okay, well, I don't want to make people wait to the end too. So if somebody was interested in doing this, how would they contact you?
The easiest thing is to just call me, 248-335-6166. Once again, 248-335-6166. That's our office number. If it goes to voicemail, the system will send me an email that there's a voicemail in the system. So you may get a call quicker than you anticipate if you call at 3 a.m. and I'm up. But they can also email Allan, ALLAN, Daniels, DANIELS @gmail.com is the easiest email to use because it's just first name, last name.
And I will put all this in the show notes too, but I have to. You do have a cash for landcontracts.com. That's cash, just the number 4, landcontracts.com. It's global economy, Alan. We got it.
Okay, yeah.
You could get some European
yeah, we've got our
business.
website, and there's a form there, and then we.
So you have been in business 20 plus years successfully. You're what I call a grizzly veteran. We kind of know how you got started. We know what you did before. We know what you're working on now. Successful people have successful habits, right? So I like to identify these habits. I did not grow up with successful people. I was not around successful people. I didn't have good role models for success. So kind of one of the things I've been doing since I got my ass kicked twice is I try and look for success habits. And I'm assuming I'm not the only one who wasn't exposed to. Now some of the habits I was exposed to made me very successful. But it's kind of like having an incomplete game. So Allan Daniels wakes up in the morning ready to conquer the world. Did you have a morning routine? What do you do when you wake up in the morning? I know you have a physical routine. You and Chris Mosier have got me in better shape, the best shape I've ever been in my life watching you guys. But what is your morning routine? What does your routine look like, your success routine?
Well, I wish I had a better routine, but I stretch every morning, and some mornings I'm better than others at exercising. But I find that the stretching helps. I do have a vice, which is caffeine, so I'll definitely have my coffee, and I usually have a protein bar or something for breakfast and some fruit. I think I'm more of a morning person than a night owl. So on my best days, I'm up and running early.
What time do you wake up?
Usually, probably around 6. It's sometimes dependent on what's going on with the school year and so
AM
forth.
for millennials. Okay.
Sometimes it depends on the school year, and then of course if I've got to be in Lansing early in the morning for a meeting or something, it could be 5. I think it varies depending on what I've got scheduled. Sometimes you may have, let's say if you were only free to do this at 7:30. I'm in a family business. We're not necessarily 9 to 5, and if there's something that could potentially help, earn a living, and it's going to be an evening or a weekend appointment, I might not be at the gym. I might not be at home at a certain hour. I may be in next early. I may be in late. So so the routine may vary based on demand. And I think that might be a habit is that, is to be somewhat flexible. And I think for the most part, my family understands. Now, it was a little bit, as my wife and I were dating, a little bit of a challenge. She grew up, her father was a school teacher, and, a very good school teacher. But I think the best way to bring out this difference, it wasn't unusual for me growing up that my dad got home, after seeing patients all day, and then he'd be on the phone, in the evening with the office manager talking about, maybe it was who paid their bill, or maybe it's about how many appointments the next day, or what how an interview with a potential hygienist went, or so it was work. The workday didn't end at home, and it was just something I observed. So I remember my wife and I don't know if we were engaged at the time, but we went to Disney World. It was before we got married, and it was early enough that I didn't carry a cell phone, although they probably were in bags at the time.
Suitcase.
Yeah. But we had a thing that was sort of advanced at the time called voicemail, but you had to call into a number to go listen to your voicemails. So we're in line for Space Mountain or something, and I said, wait in line, I'm going to go call my voicemail. And so I go to a payphone at Disney World, and, I'm writing down my voicemails, and then I figure, I'm going to call people back.
Hey, that was a cutting edge of
while
technology.
we're in line, and she says, we're on vacation. I'm like, well, yeah, but we're just in line now. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary for me. But I can see, whether it was military family or, or an educational family, you know, it wasn't something where, you know, in the summertime you're taking a vacation, that'll be different maybe if you're teaching summer school, but, you know, under most circumstances, and I do realize, you know, my father-in-law won't watch this, but I do realize that teaching doesn't end. There's papers to grade, there's preparation for the coming year, so I don't
There's a
think.
difference between being an employee and a business owner. There
Yeah,
just is.
yeah, so I think that, you know, so is there a routine? Well, the routine is just be ready for that life, and I think it might have been a little easier for me because I sort of saw that. On the other hand, you know, some people may go the other direction where they see, then like, I don't want to ever be on the phone, you know, when I could be, playing, you know, doing something else at the time. I think, you know, being flexible would be one. I think still, you know, the first phone call of the day, I'm still, you know, it's not quite as bad as, you know, looking in the yellow pages and picking up that phone the first time, but I still, you know, you have to prepare for that first phone call, because whatever, you know, whether, you know, if you picked up a coffee on the way in or a Diet Coke and it spilled on your, you know, or in the car, on the console, or on, you know, or something else didn't go right, you know, in the morning, or whatever's on your mind, you got to get your mind clear and remember to smile when you're on the phone and you know, get back to basics. So that first phone call, you know, it's like, I played a lot of sports and I still play softball, you know, it's like getting in the batter's box, trying to get ready, or, you know, or rubbing up that baseball before you pitch. So, you know, you try to prepare. On the other hand, there's a constant challenge, and I'm going every which way here, but, you know, when you're in a family business or your own business, it's the constant challenge between working on the business and working in the business. I work in the business, but I'm also responsible for working on the business.
This is a great point. I'm glad you brought this up. I didn't write this down.
Yeah, so, you know, so what do you know, working on and it can change at a moment's notice. I mean, I'm working in the business trying to produce, you know, so I'm making phone calls, checking emails, you know, responding, trying to multitask, got a deal, talking to a title company, whatever, and the internet goes down. Okay, so, you know, what do? I mean, somebody's got to call Comcast. You got limited people. Maybe, you know, I might be the only one here, or, you know, or if there's someone else here, you know, they're doing something else that can be done maybe without internet. And, you know, we've got a portable hotspot, we'll fire that up, but it's like dial-up speed, and, you know, so you've got to deal with these things. I remember meeting a realtor at Kirby's when there was a power outage one time, you know, so you're on your cell phone, you know, so I mean, you've got to adapt. You got to be here when the Comcast guy comes if it's not a area outage. So you got to deal with all these things. So I think it's a mindset, and you don't always know what's happening. You know, I in the sports, I played 3 sports in high school. I was good at 2 of them, but I was good.
Sounds like me. I was good at one of them.
I was fortunate enough to be on a very good soccer team, and I was the goalkeeper, and I was honorable mention All-State as a goalkeeper. I played basketball in the winter, and I sat at the end of the bench and got in a few games. I joked that I played a lot of basketball on Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, but the games were Tuesdays and Fridays.
Yeah.
But I really felt, you know, part of the team because I made those starters work hard on the days that I was, you know, the scout team. And then baseball, I was a decent pitcher and played center field when I didn't pitch. But the analogy was the goalkeeping and the pitching. I mean, you don't know in those situations what might happen. I mean, you practice, and, you know, you practice penalty shots, you practice, you know, other things, but you don't know whether somebody's going to come on a 3-on-2 or somebody's going to have a breakaway. You don't know whether, you know, the guy in your own team is going to head the ball into the net. That happened to me. You don't know whether that same guy in the same game, this happened my junior year of high school, has a handball in the box, which creates a penalty kick, and then you're lucky enough, you know, because penalty kick, you really just guess what side you're going to go to.
It's a huge guess.
But I mean, and then you got to get lucky enough that you get a piece of it. So I guessed, and I got a hand on it, picked up the ball, and the guy that caused the penalty penalty kick, comes up and hugs me, and I'm thinking, get away from me, you're gonna touch the ball again, so I mean, it's, I mean, he's just reacting, but I mean, it's fun. I remember that till the day I die, but also pitching, I mean, you could make the best pitch, and, guy hits it well, so I think, sports is a good analogy, because it tells you to be ready to react, the goalkeeping, the pitching, and then also, and my son plays tennis, but I think, with pitching and tennis, there's a couple, and I was a junk baller, I didn't have a really good fastball. So it was a lot of thinking and maybe, where do they think you're gonna throw it, and hopefully you can hit a spot somewhere else, or, they're looking for a fastball, you're throwing a curve, or they're looking for the slow curve and then makes your fastball look even faster. So I think with business, you're trying to think, like, looking for our niches. Okay, well, what's everybody else doing? And then am I worried about saying what we're doing now on the internet? Well, yeah, I mean, it could create more competition, but it could also create opportunity that there's people looking. So I think one of the things I'm focusing now a little bit more is networking through your group and other groups, because that's, better way to find our target market than perhaps the newspaper, because nobody gets it.
Yeah, like I say, nobody,
Yeah.
that was gonna be one of the
Yeah.
questions I asked was, what are you, and obviously, please don't give away some,
Trade secret.
yeah, but what are you doing to generate leads? You just mentioned one thing, right? I'm gonna come back to some success habits real quick too, but you brought it up.
Okay.
What are you doing to generate leads? How are you generating leads?
Well, I don't think there's any secret sauce. I think, anyone in this industry really, knows what the basics are, and that some people do a little better job of it, and I think there's people that do a lot better job of it than I do, as far as internet marketing and, whether they call it drip marketing with your newsletter and all that. I mean, I know about all these things, but again, it's where do you find the time to implement everything when you're also, the phone rings, what are you gonna do? Let it go to voicemail because I'm, working on my newsletter right now, so what doesn't get finished? The newsletter. You try to create more hours, but you do the best. But I think what's worked effectively for us is the one-on-one and talking to people and letting them know what we do. And then people, and I think part of it might be my dad's background in dentistry, because people will say they hate their dentist. Well, my dad said his patients liked him. Well, why? Because if they didn't like him, they didn't come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, he solved the need for them. I mean, either whether it was, if they wanted a nicer smile, it was that, or whether they were in pain and he relieved the pain. So it's the same here. I mean, people don't particularly like investors or, or lenders. But if someone, especially a real estate investor or landlord, has a need for capital, and then they, find that, they can carry on a conversation with someone, and that they also have a creative mind, and, they can brainstorm ideas, and it's sort of fun, and you're doing business. So I think, that's what, it's just sort of talking to people, which isn't a secret sauce, or, what is it, the Colonel's secret recipe.
Being open helps too, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything I could pinpoint that's proprietary, but what I'm trying to do a little more consciously is to get out there a little more. And
you do a lot of networking. I watch you. You network a lot. So I know that had to be one of the many ways, I'm sure.
Yeah, although, the question in two is trying to maximize the return on that. Sometimes you're networking with people that, it might not be the right audience. But, we're fishing and we're looking for needles in haystacks, all of us. And if you can find, that one fish, that works, that'll feed your family or whatever. And then, the other thing is, real estate investors and landlords tend to be somewhat loyal. I mean, if you're rehabbing a house and you have an electrician you work with, and he shows up when he's supposed to show up, usually you're only gonna make this mistake once where somebody says, I'll do your electrical for, for less money. And then you find out the hard way, well, it's less money, but that person didn't show up on Monday when he was supposed to. And you had the drywaller scheduled to come Tuesday. And now, because the electrician didn't come in, now you don't wanna close that wall up because you gotta have, a
Reliable will get you a long way in this business.
So it's the same thing with the source of capital. If someone, if you find that you work well with someone and it works, are you going to try something new and untested because, maybe it's, 99 cents cheaper? Maybe not. But usually you're gonna be, happy because it's good enough even without an extra 99 cents in the deal.
It's cheaper to keep your current customers than it is to go get new ones
Yeah.
all the time, right?
Yeah, so.
Retention, so your retention must be really high.
Well, we try, and then also I learned at a young age, and this probably wasn't on your list of questions, that, sometimes, if you can't do something, it's best to let someone know, sooner rather than later. I had a situation, this is another anecdote, early in my career I was, definitely, younger than 30 and maybe even younger than 25. There was a pretty experienced real estate developer that came in. It was this table, but it was probably in another building at the time.
This table?
Yeah, same conference room. Yeah.
All right, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Same
little
table.
history.
Yeah.
So we're on the table.
Yeah, and this was in the old dental office administrative building, so it's from like around 83 maybe, or no, I'm sorry, this table, anyway, 87 I'd say. Okay. But the point I was trying to make before I digress was that experienced developer, developed a lot of subdivisions and everything. I think we had bought a land contract from his ex-wife, and that's how he got our name. He was looking for financing for the infrastructure for this 120 acres he bought up in southern Genesee County. I think it was in Davison. And so what that would be for the roads, the underground utilities, everything, and then he was going to get about 80 lots. And, and I told him, I said, this is really, sort of complicated. It's like a construction loan. There's a lot of things like mechanics liens and things that could go wrong, and some of which I don't even know about, some of which I've read in books like the term I just mentioned. And I said, it's too complicated for us. I said, we could either make a loan on the raw land based on what you paid, since it was on the open market, or once you have those 80 lots, then we could look at each one of those as worth and then figure out a loan to value and loan on those. And, pretty sternly, he got up, or stoically, I should say, he rolled up his blueprints that he had laid out over the table, and, we shook hands and he walked out, and, and I'm like, this didn't end, there was a handshake, but not, like a deal. And, so I didn't really know. So then, probably at least a couple years later, I got a call, same guy, says, you gonna be in the office? I said, yeah, can I stop by around whatever time? I said, sure, So he comes in and he's got something that I would say would, right in our sweet spot. It was free and clear property. He had excellent income. It was his second home. It was on Lake Huron up in the Thumb area. And, like a 3-story beautiful home. We wanted to borrow in the very low 6 figures, like 100,000 on it. It was probably worth, much, much more than that. And, so I, met our criteria. We did the loan very quickly. And at the closing, after everything, the ink was dry and everything, I asked him, I said, well, what made you call me? And he says, it's because you said no to me the last time. And I said, I was a little older, but not older. And I said, I haven't heard that as a reason before. I said,
I wish I worked on the dating scene.
Yeah. And, so he said, well, what you told me in, in 15 minutes the first time we met, if I would have gone to, you know, a regular mortgage broker, it would have taken 6 weeks, because they
Yeah.
would have said, yeah. They would have called all their investors,
Yeah.
and I would have called, how's it going? They would say, fine, and then they would have come back in the same
That's
answer.
exactly how
And
it
I
would
said,
have
well, I
been.
probably could have told you in 5 minutes, but I was sort of nervous. And he said, but when I had something that I knew was, you know, sort of your bread and butter, you know, I figured it would be just as efficient and it would get done. And, you know, he was, at the time, he was building a mini storage. And so he needed some, you know, working capital that he borrowed on that property he owned up on in the Thumb area to finish the mini storage. And, you know, so that's why time was of the essence. Now, bear in mind, with Dodd Frank, we couldn't do that today because it's
No,
a second
yeah,
home, even though it
yeah.
was business purpose. We'd probably, you know, because it was a second home and not a true investment property.
I'll put you in real estate jail.
Yeah, well, you know, it wouldn't be worth the risk, and, you know, and we'd err on the side of caution. There might be others that would do it. But now today, I think, you know, it's, the degree of difficulty is a little higher. But, you know, but what I did learn from there is, you know, that, you know, even if the news is not good, you know, be honest, you know, deliver it, because, you know, that in the end is gonna benefit you. So it's the same, it is related to networking, is that, you know, even though you may talk to someone, and it, you know, you may just meet them in passing at an event or something, you know, if you try to, you know, be yourself, treat them with the respect, have the conversation, let them know what you do, you know, you don't know who they'll talk to, or, you know, that they may 2-3 years later remember you because either you were, you know, maybe you were a jerk, or maybe, you know, you were genuine. And we all have our moments. I mean, sometimes, you know, you do, you know, have a bad day, and, you know, sometimes people are like oil and water, so you're not gonna, you know, win friend and influence everyone, to paraphrase
Play the long game,
Dale
right?
Carnegie, but you try to do the right thing.
Okay, so what numbers do you track in your business? So like, how do you know that you're doing the right thing day in, day out? Like, do you track numbers, or there's goals you're trying to hit? I know you mentioned a few things where you're looking to increase, what do you call it? Sorry, I'm not 100% familiar with
About
it.
the size of the portfolio.
So, yeah, increase the size of your portfolio, right?
Yeah.
So how do you, what are you tracking?
Well, I think first and foremost, are the lights on? No.
That helps.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you
You
know.
walk in the morning, they're
yeah,
off,
we're
that's a
keeping
bad
the lights
sign.
on, and, you know, and so I think it's really, you know, basic. I mean, we're fortunate, we do have a full-time bookkeeper, and I get some reports as far as, our, you know, portfolio. Each week, you know, I get a report as far as, you know, just like a landlord would, of, you know, who's paid and who hasn't, and because I know everybody, you know, sometimes, you know, I'll call somebody up, or maybe somebody called me and said, you know, I'm gonna be in Tuesday, or I'm gonna, you know, something's in the mail, or whichever, but I mean, we try to keep a close eye on everything. So I think that would be a lesson, is, you know, you have to really track everything, but if you're, you know, if the cash flow coming in is something that your business is dependent on, you can't just, you know, ignore when people are not meeting their obligations. So, you know, you need to do that. The other thing you need to track is that, are you making progress of what's in your pipeline? And by pipeline, you know, is deals in progress. So, you know, is, you know, like, we've got a closing coming up Friday. You know, the title work's ordered. You know, our document's gonna get done in time. You know, in this case, I'm not gonna be able to be at the closing, so I'm gonna need them probably by Wednesday to get them FedExed, and, you know, so that they're there for, you know, maybe Thursday would work, but they've gotta be there for a morning Friday closing, some of which they need originals. So we've gotta keep on, you know, we've gotta track, you know, and this isn't that necessarily accounting, but we've gotta track what's going on, there. So there's a whole lot to, you know, to juggle. When I was younger, I was really good about keeping everything in my head. Now,
work, yeah.
I mean, it used to work. I mean, I would keep everything on paper too. I've gone to pretty much a Mac-based system, so things are either in calendar, reminder, or notes. I started using Evernote a little bit, but I think I'm gonna stay within the Apple family, because I hear the next OS 10 version and iOS 9 is gonna put the Notes app on steroids to compete with Evernote. But I mean, you try to keep up to speed on everything. The other thing I track, you know, and again, it's not so much numbers, it's more, and I guess this is why I majored in communication and not finance. I try to, within 24 hours, return all my phone calls and emails. Because I think that's, you know, key. Now, I don't always succeed, and, you know, but it's not for lack of effort. And, you know, because I think that's, you know, it's really not that difficult to do most of the time. I'd like the unsubscribe button for a lot of these things I get to, the spam. Sometimes they reappear. But I think, you know, sometimes that's more important than the number, because people are, you know, it's relationship based. You know, our
opportunity is time sensitive, right?
Exact. Well, yeah. You know, so I think there's a lot to track, and it's just, you know, it comes back to trying to be detail oriented. And sometimes, you know, you give up, you know, a home run, or the ball gets by you or goes through your legs when you're the goalie.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, you're
sitting. It always reinvigorates me.
Yeah, you're sitting on the bench and somebody else is playing. You know, I mean, I think you try to, you know, you take your lumps, but sometimes you just, you know, you still feel bad when you miss something. And there were a couple opportunities within the past year, you know, that, you know, there were just misses, and you know, I mean, you know, and it was, you know, I think I called somebody back within a day or two, or I left messages, and then they said, well, the reason I didn't call you back is because I got this other person I was talking to. And I'm like, well, do you want to give us another chance? No, I'm okay with what I got. You know, and you just don't know. I mean, sometimes you're just going to lose. I mean, even if you pitched well, you know, you lose one.
Do you use any software, or how do you track and manage your leads and take them from leads to clients to deals to transactions to?
Well, because we don't do a high volume, so it's I guess the trick. It's pretty much manual based, or those apps I described, as far as, you know, what I would call you know, what some people would use Salesforce for, some of those contact. I used to use Act back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And then there was Goldmind I tried out, and I haven't really found a good Mac equivalent for it. So I put reminders in calendar, and, you know, and then I do use some paper. And it seems to work. I use a loose leaf binder, and, you know, I have some color coding and highlights of who I need to go back, and, you know, and then some I'll carry to the next day, you know, as far as phone calls, or I'll make notes in my calendar. You know,
would that be like a kind of like a Franklin system?
It's similar, but it's just an Allan.
An Allan system.
It's a night at the Improv sometimes, because I haven't found something good. When I got, you know, an iPad, I figured, okay, I'm going to get a stylus and write everything on my iPad, and then I thought I'd get one of these bamboos. Yeah. And what I found is, you know, sometimes, I mean, I think people find, you know, even a small iPad like this is sometimes a barrier. Or you're looking at that. So I tend, when I meet with people, I use a yellow pad and a pen. You know, then we'll sometimes scan it. Some of them I shred. You know, some I'll put in a file. You know, I mean, it may depend. Sometimes I'll have copies of, you know, things. So each deal is different, and each person is different, and you know, sometimes you find that you're going to want to keep stuff. Sometimes, you know, this was more of a meet and greet, and, you know, I took some notes, but it's really not something that a name and phone number I already have in my address book. So.
Well, I do see you are adopting technology, though. You do have an iPad, and was that an iPhone, or what?
Yeah, this is the phablet.
The phablet.
It's the 6 Plus, they call it.
There you go, the 6 Plus. So okay. So you're still doing some paper, and mostly with the Apple system.
Yeah.
So, and some sort of Franklin/Allan color.
Yeah, and then some of our accounting and our mortgage servicing is still Windows based. So we use Parallels and Windows, you know, for the programs that need that on a business level. But most of my day-to-day stuff is within the Apple ecosystem, and, you know, it's once you go Mac, you never go back.
I've heard that, and now that I have an iPad, I am fucking disgusted by how well it works in comparison to an Android. I wish I would have made at least when it comes to the iPad, the switch way earlier. It's just way easier to use.
Well, and even Windows runs better, from my experience, on a MacBook or, on the
Why
Mac.
does that not surprise me?
Well, some people say because, it's not using all the other resources, but others is, you perhaps have, you pay more for the hardware, so it should run better.
You should, yeah, they just take more time. So, you're a Grizzly veteran. Undoubtedly, there's somebody listening to this right now. I don't know, maybe they're in high school. Maybe they have a shit job working at a grocery store or whatever. They want a wife, kids, whatever. Or maybe they just failed so many times. They're looking to do something new. And we don't recommend, but let's say if you were starting from scratch today, because I don't want to say what would you recommend, because we recommend nothing. You go get a lawyer. But if you were starting from scratch today, what would Mr. Allan Daniels do?
Well, I don't know if there's too much I would do differently. I would tell someone starting out, as I mentioned already in this podcast numerous times, I would recommend they take the 40-hour pre-licensure class to be even if they don't want to become a real estate salesperson, because I think that gives them, the basics of what the ground rules are. And then, I think try it out, see if you like it. It can be addicting, when you, what do they call the type of rush it is, dopamine or whatever. And I think it's the same thing, a closing, sometimes even on a small deal, you feel the sense of fulfillment that, something, that, happened. Just like in competition, but it's not necessarily that you beat someone, it's just that a goal was reached. And because, and it's a mutual goal, so it's fulfilling. And so I think that makes it enjoyable, in that you help someone else and you reach your goal too, and all that effort, got to a closing. It's incredibly frustrating sometimes too. But I think, those ups and downs are what makes it somewhat exciting. And I think there are some days like a merry-go-round too, roller coaster and merry-go-round metaphors. So what would I tell someone to do is, I think, learn the ground rules, see if you have any interest in learning about it, and then, try it out. And whether it's brokering, whether you have some capital invest, if you don't have the stomach, to suffer any loss, then being an investor, maybe is something you're not cut out for. I talked to a gentleman that had sold a bigger mortgage company prior to 2007, and it was in the early 2000s, and he said, I think I want to do what you guys are doing now that, you had a nest egg of money. And I said, okay, well, let me tell you about this recent deal, and it was something where it made perfect sense when we invested in the deal, and then all these things that no one would have predicted happened. And it was a property that had a decent value, and then the marriage dissolved, so half the income disappeared. And then the spouse that stayed, it happened to be the husband that stayed in the house, the wife moved up north, I guess got lonely, and had a female companion come over and some of her friends, and whether they were too loud or whether there were things going on at this impromptu party or whatever, it got raided. And so he and everyone else got hauled off to the Oakland County Jail, or whether it was a lockup or whatever. And the police left the door open, and Building and Safety drove by the next business day and saw that it was open to trespass and tagged the property. And then they called sanitation, and unbeknownst to me, in the backyard, the guy sort of fixed up engines, and it was handy, just like someone might in a garage, but seeing as though they were in the garage, in the yard, it was fenced with a, solid wood fence, so you couldn't see, which, and the neighbors weren't complaining, but since Building and Safety had been there, they called sanitation to haul everything away to the dump. And of course, they did it overtime and has put that on as a special assessment on the property. So now our collateral went from being something up to code that was a performing loan to before the next payment was due, was now a loan that I now found out isn't gonna perform, and the collateral is worth about half of what it was, because in order to get the property, I learned this, up to code, it requires a team inspection, and even though it was up to code when it was built, maybe in 1952, codes have changed, so everything needed to be changed. So plumbing, electrical, furnace, everything. So the market for that house, and then, also you got a big assessment, which has priority over our lien, because it's government assessment. And so I told this other gentleman about this deal. He says, maybe I'm not cut out for that.
Yeah.
I mean, because here we did everything right, but it was the circumstances that just caused the deal, to not work out great. Now, we turned a little bit, the lemon into lemonade, or we were able to salvage it a little bit, in that the husband, realized the predicament he was in, and he says, I'm willing to sign off. I said, well, what about your ex? Well, she doesn't live here anymore anyway. I said, well, yeah, but it's gonna take a long time to go through the process. And by then I was worried they were gonna tear down the house. And so I got a phone number somehow, maybe from him or lawyers or wherever, for the ex-wife, and she said as long as he signed first, she would sign off.
Yeah, she didn't want him.
She didn't want him ending up with it. So we were able.
Fair enough.
Right? But we had to have the attorney, I think, file an injunction or something to keep the city from tearing it down. And I don't know if we had to file a bond or something, but I think, we were a good citizen. I mean, we wanted it to, to be nice. I mean, we didn't want the neighbors complaining or anything, but we couldn't do anything until we had permission to enter the house and had title. So we ended up selling it to a rehabber in the area, we came out not as good as we would have thought, but it worked out, as probably the best it could under the circumstances. But again, you just can't predict. And so you have to sort of realize that, there's new things that can happen, and, you just, after you're done crying about it or swearing or whatever, you have to figure out, okay, now what do I do? And, that's just part of business. Okay, do I have to learn something new, or, about the law, or what can go, or how to dig out of this? But there's also sometimes opportunities where creativity can come in too. A friend of mine who I met, we bought a land contract from him, he's a real estate broker. We developed a friendship, and we ended up forming an LLC before he retired from real estate, but we invested in real estate together. We bought a property in St. Clair County when land could still be developed, there was market. And we were able to do a land division into 4 parcels, and while we were in the process of waiting for our new tax IDs from the county assessor, we were contacted by a natural gas company that they wanted to buy our underground storage rights to store natural gas. And we pretty much knew going into the deal that we were going to be able to split the property horizontally. We had no idea we could split it vertically.
Oh.
So it was like bonus round, or, it wasn't quite big enough to win the lottery, but here was something. In the 40-hour class, I learned about subsurface rights and air rights and things like that, but here was, interesting. Somebody cold calls us, would you like to sell your underground rights? I'm like, yeah, we're gonna sell this, as long as it's way below where a basement would go.
Yeah, deeper than the
basement. All the way
basement.
down to the core, or the people in China listening, or Australia, we didn't sell that far.
Yeah.
So once in a while you get lucky, but you learn. It's funny because we're like, we need a lawyer to negotiate with this gas company. So, friend of a friend or attorney to attorney, we get a referral for an attorney, and he says, oh yeah, I specialize in this type of thing. Tell me about it. He says, I can't say anymore. I said, why is that? He says, because I'm representing the other side. So as a matter of fact, we got another attorney, and it turns out, it ends up, there aren't a whole lot of attorneys that specialize in that, and it's sort of like, prosecutors and defense attorneys, or bankruptcy creditors, attorneys, debtors, attorneys. They're always dealing with each other. They know each other's tricks. So it worked out well. We found another attorney, and the deal got made relatively easily because they're always making deals with each other, and they also know they have a fiduciary duty for their client. They respect that, so it worked out really well.
for both sides.
That's really, so can you handle loss and also just kind of always be open to the opportunity, because you never know when opportunity's gonna come knocking.
Yeah,
And if you don't take a risk, necessarily, you don't always get the opportunity, so.
yeah, and I think, you know, you have to, I think, you know, hedge is a word that's got a bad connotation, but you know, you also, you have to be careful not to bet the farm. You know, my dad has friends that are older than him, and they joke, you know, that they don't even buy green bananas anymore. I mean, you know, that's long-term investing. You know, so you have to look at where you are.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so, you know, so you look at the, you know, situation. I mean, right now, you know, where am I? Well, I probably am a little less active personally. Why? Well, because I got, you know, tuition and housing, and, you know, now I still need to earn a living, but, you know, I've got, you know, a certain amount in reserve that money is gonna stay at a return that I'm almost, you know, like nothing. I mean, it's not negative, but I mean, it's, you know, it's an FDIC insured account. So why? Because that's, you know, allocated towards a specific purpose.
Don't bet the farm.
Yeah, so don't bet the farm, but, you know, figure out your appetite. Like the deal you started out with earlier, that size, you know, when I would, you know, it still might be, you know, something I would buy for myself, but you know, I remember, you know, investing, you know, you know, it was all for my dad, and then, you know, after about a year and a half, there was something that, you know, came in. It was a land contract, and, you know, it was small enough, and I had saved enough, and I remember sort of sheepishly going in my dad's, like, I'd like to buy it. And, you know, and it was the first one I actually did for myself, and you know, I remember, you know, that, you know, this is G-rated, but I mean, you know, did I have the cojones for that?
That's
you
right.
Know,
I'll
know,
say it.
yeah, I mean,
Balls.
yeah.
You have the appetite for risk.
Yeah, so, but you know, it was a smaller deal, and I felt that, you know, even if they didn't pay, and you know, but, you know, that I could handle it, but I also, you know, it was different. Even, you know, though I was really, really careful, but I think, you know, it wasn't that I was, you know, it was a risk, you know, with the percentage of my net worth at that time, it was still pretty high.
Yeah,
you know.
at some point you do have to get in or
Yeah,
out.
so I think someone, you know, you have to look at it from where you are in life. Like my dad, you know, he was looking, okay, well, if I, you know, and this probably before I came on board, if something happens and, you know, I'm developing land and doing this and doesn't work, well, I can always fix teeth. You know, I mean, so he had a marketable skill. So the question is, you know, before someone quits their day job, so to speak, is, you know, what's plan B? Now, for me, I don't really know what plan B is. I mean, and that's somewhat worrisome, but I think, you know, where I regained some confidence through those years is, you know, I've got the real estate knowledge. Fortunately, we've got, you know, the capital. And it really comes back to basics, finding those niche. You know, we can't do what we used to do because that door is closed, and we don't want to be Al Capone.
No.
We'd rather be Stroh's. But it's a matter of putting on your thinking cap and what can you do with the skill set you have. And, you know, so you try to remain positive. And then you don't want to do deals just because they're deals either. You don't want to lower your standards. And that was maintaining that discipline, especially during that downturn, required, you know, some real, it wasn't easy.
Not that I would have listened, but where were you in 2006, sir? I wouldn't have listened. But,
Yeah, so you wanna, you know, if it doesn't make sense, I mean, don't do it just because you haven't had a deal for a while. So that's where, you know, you try to stick to the plan the best you can. And, you know, we've all made mistakes, and, you know, and I think that's just part of learning too. So you try to take a lesson from it and not to make the same one again.
Well, I have so many more questions that I'd like to ask, but I think I'm gonna end it. But I'm gonna end it, and
We gotta answer Brent's and Steve's.
we do. So let's ask that. Although they could be really long. And before we do that, though, in a couple months, can we come back and do this again? I have a really good time talking to
Would
you.
you come back tomorrow? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a really good time talking to
Okay.
you, so, but we should, all right, so, Mr. Brent Maxwell, this is from the Facebooks. I
Okay.
posted yesterday to the
The
Facebooks.
Facebook.
The
You did?
Facebooks. For those of you listening, go to facebook.com/Detroit Investment Club. This is where I will post who the speaker is going to be, and if you have any questions for him and all that. So Mr. Brent Maxwell, he asked a question. I want to provide conforming in-house financing to qualified buyers. How can I provide personal residence loans to people without a bunch of red tape? Or how can I minimize the red tape? Last question, what structure is best? I think I already know the answer to this question, so.
Well, I think it's gonna be very, very difficult for him to do that. The new rules, you know, the first question is, does he own a crystal ball? You know, to predict. I mean, you know, I've got a 2-hour presentation just on Dodd Frank, ability to repay itself. Maybe not 2 hours, might be 3.
Yeah.
No, but I think in this situation, if you go down to the basics, the first thing he's gonna need is 2 licenses. In Michigan, you're gonna need to be licensed as a mortgage loan originator. And that's an individual license that requires a 20-hour course, fingerprinting, criminal background check, passing a test, and then you'll need a sponsor. In this case, I'm assuming he wants to become his own sponsor, which means his entity or himself would need to be licensed under the Mortgage Broker Lender Servicers Licensing Act, where they do a background check, character and fitness test, experience test, which is more subjective, where they actually, you know, would, you know, look at your resume rather than, and then
Make sure
that-
yesterday you weren't delivering
yeah,
newspapers.
yeah, exactly. That you know that you're, you know, you're worthy of the public trust, similar to like they would do for bank officers. You know, I know others would disagree. What do they do with bank officers? But in any event, you know, and then you're going to need a bond, which to service mortgages, it's $125,000 bond. So the bonding company is going to need to know that you've got, you know, assets in excess of that, because you're, you know, the bond doesn't just come out of thin air, and then you pay a premium for the bond. It's usually $1, $1,000. After you've been around a while, you might be able to shop and get a little better rate. The license fee, you know, is over $1,000 now. The background check, or what they call, I think it's I don't remember exactly what they call it, but it's a $450 investigation fee, non-refundable, and you know, and then there's an activity fee. So if you're successful, you're paying a certain amount, up to a maximum of about $5,000 a year for that license. The individual license, I think, is $250 or $350, and then you need a bond for that too. So the licenses is going to be the first challenge, and then, you know, you're going to need to know the rules, and the rules are essentially that qualified buyers, he's saying here, if they're qualified, they can already go to the bank. So what benefit is this to you?
Yeah,
Because-
Brent, this might be a follow-up question. I mean,
Yeah.
are we talking conforming, non-conforming,
Yeah.
or, I imagine I'm gonna take it, so I'm gonna guess, wild ass guess, I'm not saying this is what Mr. Brent Maxwell's going to do. I know he operates and owns and manages a significant amount of property in the city of Detroit, and financing is difficult, if not impossible, although that may change with new stupid government programs. He probably would like to finance some of these houses, and use investor money to do it. So,
Yeah, well, I
I have a feeling I know what you think
well,
about this.
he's gonna have to have the license structure, you know, first of all, to do it legally, because otherwise he's gonna get shut down. You know, and then, you know, the challenge is gonna be, is that, the government requires now that the lender make a determination of the borrower's ability to repay. Now, there is a safe harbor for Fannie Mae, FHA, Freddie Mac, you know, approved loans. There's also what's called a qualified mortgage, and I don't have all the ingredients in front of me, but it's got to be fully amortized is one thing, and then also that the points and fees are, in most cases, below 3%. For smaller loans, it might be a dollar amount, but it's still pretty small, and it's, you know, by the time you figure appraisal, title work, closing fee, you're gonna hit, you know, that pretty easily or exceed it.
And then, the interest rate cannot be more than a certain, a couple of ticks over what they call the average prime offered rate, which is essentially like the Freddie Mac rate. So it's gonna have to be low cost, or low yield, so the investors may not be interested in it. Also, it's gonna have to be fully amortizing, which on a small loan amount may not be hard to do. Maybe they could get it so 8-10 years would fully amortize. But otherwise, if they're in what they call a non-qualified mortgage, then anytime someone didn't pay and you went to enforce that default, the borrower could challenge that by saying, you didn't do a proper job of determining my repayment ability, therefore you can't foreclose on me. And there's no statute of limitations to that defense, so it's like a poison pill.
I have to pause here and just say what a fucking sad state of affairs it is, that somebody else has to determine what you can and can't afford, and you, as the consumer, can basically push your responsibility onto a business. I do not agree with that, and I think that's sad. I just want to say that, so. But that's sobering too.
Yeah.
Because if it's your money on the line and a judge or a jury, I'm not sure who would, says, you know what, Mr. Maxwell, you should have known that his car was 5 years old. I think that was the example you used already. I'm trying to remember the exact example. It was a 6-year-old car. You should have anticipated
That someday during the life of the loan, they would have an unexpected expense.
the transmission would go out.
Or they
of
need
course,
a new roof. Or,
yeah, and you did not take that into consideration, you evil, greedy mortgage company.
Yeah, well, and there's no case law on this. See, if you draw a parallel to the tax code, that's been around for 100 years. So there have been people that challenge provisions in tax court or, federal court or even up to the Supreme Court over the years, and there's been decisions as far as, where the boundary is of what you can do. I mean, some of it came from the regulator through an interpretation, or some of it came from, a case, and, case at an appeals court level. Well, the Dodd Frank is so new that there's no case law yet. So unless, in this case, we're using Brent's name already, so,
Allegedly,
yeah,
he's probably doing none of this.
No, I think it's a question he put forth just
Yeah.
so the topic would be brought up, not that he's thinking of doing it, it's all hypothetical.
All hypothetical.
But in any event,
Thank you,
he'd have to have the thick enough skin or the cojones to want to be that test case.
Man.
And if you're using investor money, there's another risk is that those investors could say, you didn't tell them that there was all this risk, and yes, it was in the prospectus, but that was a thick document, and so you could have a lot of, you could have a regulator saying, because you now have a license to be able to do it, so you violated, it's a license violation, and fines and possible imprisonment for violating the law, and and having your license taken away, obviously, not doing things the way you're supposed to, and then there's a risk that the consumer on the loan itself could impair your ability to collect by asserting their rights, and then the investor where you're getting the money could also come at you with darts. And then bear in mind the definition, and you could say, well, I'm just not going to bother to get a license, I'm over in this corner of the state where they never come. And, but keep in mind that the definition under, I know one of the laws, if not both of them, a licensee is someone who is licensed or should be licensed under this act. So they've got you coming and going in that way. And I think it's, it's a cat and mouse, because there were people trying to say, well, I wasn't licensed, you don't have authority. They've defined license in such a way that, so it comes back to following the rules. If anyone out there, there's other people that may have a different interpretation through their attorney, and may have a different risk tolerance. Just like on a deal, they may have a different compliance risk tolerance, and maybe you might see some people doing that. They may say, well, if I'm ever challenged, I just won't foreclose, I'll walk away. I don't see how that covers them on the regulatory violation end, because they still made a loan
Yeah.
without.
You could
but-
still potentially go to jail, whether
Yeah,
you're willing to
or-
take a 100%
yeah, or
financial
you're-
loss or not.
Exactly, so there's some risk, you know, or, you know, I don't, you know, depending on, you know, I mean, Habitat for Humanity is still around. Of course, they're zero interest loans, so I think he would want a better yield than zero.
I would hope so.
But I imagine, you know, there might be a markup, even though Habitat gets donated labor and perhaps some donated materials. I'm assuming they have some overhead, and they, although possibly it's all from donations. But you know, I don't know if on the sale of the house there, you know, there is a little bit of overage between what the supplies cost them and the labor cost them and their overhead, you know, in order to sustain themselves. I mean, even nonprofits need revenue
people need
over
to get paid.
expenses. Yeah,
They still need food. No matter
yeah,
what
and they
do.
still have to pay, you know,
Yeah.
the people that, their accountants and lawyers. So it's possible that, you know, there may be a way, you know, to meet that business plan. But I think for the purpose of a podcast, I can't, you know, it's not legal advice, so.
No, probably not. You know what? In 10 years, you're probably going to have to drive to your client's house and hug them before they go to sleep every night. Thanks, Congress. All right, so we also have a question from Mr. Steve Lundeau, although I think it's a leading question. Isn't that what they call a leading question?
Yeah.
Why is Dodd Frank a failure, and will they repeal/replace it? I think that is what you call a leading question, Steve. I think what he meant to say is, do you think that Dodd Frank would be a failure, and do you think they will repeal and or replace it if and when it is a failure?
I think some of it is well-intentioned, and I think, you know, I think it's an overreaction, and I think, you know, like I talked about the population of loan originators being cleansed. So now you've cleaned up the population, and you now have an educated, non-criminal,
It's always good.
yeah, populace, you know, in loan origination. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's basic.
We probably should have started with that.
Well, you
We
know,
got
but they've
there.
been tested, educated, and, you know, and then you got rid of the fraudsters. So, you know, that's pretty good. So now that you've got, you know, an educated sales force, you know, the idea of limiting the products or censoring the products that can be offered to the public a good idea? Well, maybe if you had an uneducated sales force, then you limit the choices. But, you know, if you use a parallel with the securities market where there's all sorts of securities products, but those offering securities are educated and non-felon, you know, to enter. But they have a standard, it's somewhat subjective, but it's called suitability. And so, but they can offer any products, but if they, I won't say green bananas, but if they offered a 40-year zero coupon bond to a 99-year-old, that probably would not be a suitable investment product. So I think there is a way of regulating a profession without censoring the products that could be offered. So am I saying that anyone should get a no-doc loan? No, but I mean, does someone with, you know, a net worth of this, that, and the other that has their income tax return has, you know, 99 K1s, should they have to, you know, get the equivalent of a colonoscopy to get a $30,000 mortgage on one property, you know, that's, you know, at a 10% loan to value, you know, which is just, you know, like the guest house or something, you know, but meanwhile, so I think it's an overreaction there.
Hold on. So for those listening, this is definitely, this part is definitely for America only. So and I'll have him explain it too. So when he's talking about with K1s is, right now there's a definite bias towards someone who has W-2 income, and not only W-2 income, but what we call a W-2 tax return. And K1, if we can, go ahead, K1 income.
Well, it's, you're in multiple partnerships and other investments, so you're, you know, you may be self-employed, or you have a lot of investment income, so it's a lot, it's just more cumbersome for someone to qualify
They
for
don't fit very
conventional
well
loan.
in a box, right?
Exactly.
And this is a minority of the population as well.
Yeah, it's, you know, it might be a needle in a haystack, but this one-size-fits-all underwriting by regulation rather than common sense, or, it's definitely limiting opportunities for people. So I think, but I think the idea of, that things were too loose, I mean, I think, there were abuses, but I think, there could have been certain tweaks to existing law.
I'm gonna put your feet to the fire here, though. Do you think it will be a failure, and/or do you think they will repeal and/or improve it?
I think it'll be revised down the road. I don't think it'll be repealed, because I think even if a majority of both chambers, both houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, vote to repeal it, which I don't think they will, but if they did, I think the president would veto it, because there's two signature pieces of legislation that came out of President Obama's presidency so far, which one is the Affordable Care Act and the other is the Financial Reform, Dodd Frank Act. So I don't think repealing is something that, will be done while he holds the veto pen. So it's possible down the road with, if there were, well, there will be a new president, but depending on who that is, that it could be repealed in the future. But I think the public, those of us in real estate and mortgage, we sort of are aware of this, but if you were to poll the public, most of them would be either neutral or in favor of Dodd-Frank and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau because of, what they see it as somebody fighting for the little guy. They don't know the nuances.
The Elizabeth Warrens of the world would line up pictures of kittens being thrown off bridges into the alligators' mouths and say, that's what you're doing, so.
Yeah, no, they don't look at, the opportunity. But I think, to be fair, to the proponents of it, I mean, you can look at a community just north of here, Pontiac, where there were some abuses that included seller financing that led to the meltdown. You had, and I won't name any names, but you had, investors buying, we'll call them distressed properties, doing very minor repairs, selling them on low down, land contracts like a used car model where, they just did some cosmetic work, maybe, $1,000 down, and, they bought a house maybe for $5,000 and then sold it for $19,000 with $1,900 down and, $450 a month. And then an appraiser looking at those sales, if they didn't look at the type of financing involved, and you're in a small community, the comps are all then went from $5,000 or $7,000 to $20,000 overnight, and then during the
I think you meant to say Detroit.
I mean we're geographically we're very close to Pontiac, and it was a smaller community to manipulate, but the same thing went on in different areas of the country. So and then if you lay subprime no doc mortgages with fraudulent appraisals on top of that, you then within a couple of rounds of the revolution or recycling this type thing, or lather, rinse, repeat, you now have an $80,000 appraisal, and what was really a house of cards, it's still all on top of a $7,000 house, and then it all fell down. So now, did they go too far in saying, with the seller financing regulations of really only having exemptions? The one true exemption is just for one in any 12-month period, because the one with three in any 12-month period is, is pretty hard. You've still got to meet that ability to pay standard. Is that too far? Yeah, I mean, somewhere in the middle between, unlimited, well, Michigan had a rule of 10 that was sort of ignored, but somewhere a little bigger, maybe 5 would have been a better number than 1, because I don't think you're going to ruin a community with 5, but it might help a residential landlord that wanted to retire and sell properties to his tenant, or when they died, it would allow the surviving spouse to do that.
Or like you've had a property for 27 and a half years, you're done depreciating. All right, sorry about that. The podcast went on ongoing, but here we are. We're now on the 3rd video on machine.
We're on the home stretch. Yeah,
we're on the home stretch. We're going to wrap this up. Well, first I want to come back, and I know you already said yes. I'll see if I book you again. I have so many questions I actually didn't ask, and that's what I was afraid of. But I think we're already over 3 hours, which is kind of
Amazing.
crazy. It is a little too long. I just got to talking. So for everyone, I highly recommend contacting Mr. Allan Daniels. I'm going to put all this in the show notes too, but you can give him a ring on his office phone. This is obviously in Michigan, so if you're on the global, all that, but go ahead and give him a call at his office, 248-335-6166, 248-335-6166. You can also send an email, Allan, Allan, Daniels, Daniels, @gmail.com. Or you can go to his blog at cash4landcontracts.com, and that's cash, the number 4, landcontracts.com. I'll also put all this in the show notes. And this is our first podcast. Renegade Detroit Investors also has a meeting. We meet the first Tuesday every month. Go to facebook.com/Detroit Investor Club, Detroit Investment Club. Or you can go and search us on Meetup. Go ahead and give me a follow on Twitter at Jeremy Burgess, or you can just go to renegadedetroit.com. Allan, always a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure too. You should have had the video pointing at you. For
Yeah,
the last
no,
part.
right there. I highly recommend.
Do the selfie.
He comes out. He goes to, occasionally he comes to RDI, Oakland, RIA, all that. He does a lot of continuing education, as he mentioned before. So if you're a realtor or a real estate agent and you see him pop up locally, I do highly recommend. And for those of you, we didn't actually get to talking too much. We have to come back and talk about Dodd Frank and all that. But
Sure.
I will include the video when he came to RDI. I'll put that link.
Yeah, now that original one, bear in mind, that was before the final rules
That
were
was
issued.
dated.
So
Yep.
there is some things that, were finalized a little different than that, but it gives you a flavor of it. So thanks so much,
Yeah, appreciate
Jeremy.
it.
It was
Yeah,
great to have
it's
you
awesome.
here, and we'll look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, we'll be back. And thanks you for your time. And for everyone, certainly give him a call. And if you could everyone do me a favor. So pull open if you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and open up your whatever email client you're using. Type in Allan, Allan Daniels, Daniels @gmail.com and say, Mr. Allan Daniels, you should start a podcast.
Okay.
Because I've been asking this man to start a podcast for 2 years. And
All
so
right,
far
well-
he's not listened to me. But maybe if this really takes off and the entire world could see this, I think he should. He has so many stories.
I'll have to get a die-hard battery or a generator.
Yeah.
for the video.
Well, I think you just get a better battery. But in the meantime, until we meet again, sir, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me come out, and thanks for sharing your time with me, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Right.